Good morning, members. We have already formed a quorum. We have got 14 members to form a quorum. Let's call the meeting to order. Mr. Kwok-hing, Chairman of the Housing Panel, has agreed that I would be chairing today's meeting. Now, item 2 on the agenda. The short to medium-term housing and land supply measures announced by the Chief Executive on August 30th, 2012. Let's invite the administration team to join us. Thank you.
首先，我歡迎出席會議嘅政。
First of all, I'd like to welcome government representatives attending today's meeting. The attendance list has been tabled before members, and therefore I do not propose to bother you with introducing them individually.
現在請兩位。
Now let's ask the two bureau directors to make a brief opening statement on this item. Yes, Professor Chung. Thank you, Chairman. During the past 2 weeks, in fact, in this council, we have had a number of occasions on which we exchange views with members on issues relating to housing and land, whether it's the council meeting during the motion debate on Wednesday or at the regular meeting of the housing panel and also the joint panel of FAP and housing panel last Friday on the on measures to manage demand. At today's meeting, we'd like to brief you on the measures announced by the Chief Executive on the 30th of August with regard to short to medium term housing and land supply measures. And as the CE said on the 30th of August, these measures are intended to speed up the process of supplying public housing and private housing in order to ease the demand in the market. First of all, I'll brief you on items relating to housing, and then the Secretary for Development will brief you on land supply matters. I'm not going to repeat the details of the paper, but then I'd just like to highlight 3 salient points here. Number 1 is about the sale of surplus HOS flats. The administration will release the remaining 832 surplus HOS flats for sale in early 2013. They are from Tin Chung Court. In the past, Tin Chung Court had disputes with the owners' committee on management fees, and will be disclosing the full details of the dispute in the sales brochure so that the buyers will be able to make an informed decision as to whether or not they like to buy those flats. And this approach has already been taken to the legal advisor for consultation, because in the dispute involving Tin Chung Court, the HA is of the view that on the part of the administration or on the part of the HA, the duty and the owners' committee's view would be different, and therefore in the sale and purchase document will be including this term, that is if anybody makes claims or institute litigation against the vendor, then the vendor or the HA will be able to deal with that so that the transaction will not be affected by that. In other words, the HA will be taking up the legal liability for such disputes or claims. With regard to the sale of the surplus stock, on the pricing and also the arrangement for payment of premium, we will adopt the traditional way of setting the prices for HOS flats and also the payment of premium arrangement. In other words, the price will be set at a certain discount or percent of market price, and that would depend on the affordability of the buyers, and those two would be pegged. And also in terms of the payment of premium, that would mean that in the future, if such units have to be sold at market rate, then we will be calculating the premium on the basis of the rate at the time of sale. That is the market rate at a discount. And then we'll be looking at the income and asset limits for white form and green form applicants, and that will be announced about 2 months prior to the sale in early 2003 or 2013. With regard to the MHPP, my home purchase plan units at Cheng Lok Street, Cheng Yi, on the 30th of August, the CE said that there are a total of 988 units, close to 1,000, and they will be sold instead. And the HKHS, the Housing Society, will be responsible for the construction and also the sale of it. And we expect that the units or the construction works will be completed in 2014, and the HKHS is now making preparation for the sale of pre-completed flats by the end of this year. With regard to the pre-sale consent application, we are reviewing that and we are inclined to selling the units that have been intended for the MPHH. There are 4,000 remaining, and they'll be sold under the pre-sale consent scheme. And also we'll be looking at the target groups, that is for those earning around $40,000 a month. They will be eligible under the MHPP, and we'll also be speeding up the construction of HOS. We will be compressing the construction process, and in various aspects we will also be identifying land for construction, and irrespective of the size of the land, we will press ahead with that. And according to the HA's PRH program in 2012-13 to 2017, we expect that every year on average we will have about 15,000 units completed, and that's the target. But of course this is not set in stone. And other than this target, every year we have about 7,000 to 8,000 so-called recovered units, and they have been recovered from the existing stock. And every year for allocation to those on the waiting list and for other needy applicants, we have around 22,000 to 23,000 units. We will continue to identify appropriate sites for the construction of PRH flats. At the same time, starting from 2016-17, when we have the new HOS coming on stream, that would also help increase the turnover in the PRH units, so that for the units that are surrendered, they can be reassigned or reallocated starting from 2017. For example, in the next 4 years, we have 17,000 HOS flats coming on stream, and assuming that half of them will be bought up by green form applicants, then about 8,500 units will be surrendered, and they will be made available for reallocation. And these are short to medium term. We hope to increase supply, and of course in the review process of the LTHS, we'll be comprehensively assessing the need and demand, and we'll be looking at how we can do a better job in terms of the medium to long term. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Chen. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Housing is the most pressing need of the community, and that's also the cornerstone for stability in our community, and that's why this is the highlight of the work of this term of government. The administration is highly concerned about the exuberance in the market, and therefore we believe that a fundamental solution to this is to come up with plans so that in the long term we'll be able to provide land in a sustainable manner to the market. And looking at the current situation, in the end of August, we have announced a series of short to medium term measures. There are a total of 10 in order to expedite the process of offering PRH and also subsidized flats to the community in order to ease the demand. And I'll be highlighting the areas that are under the Development Bureau. Number one, for the quarter from October to December, we will continue to introduce or launch the government-initiated land sale. And in the end of August, I announced that from October to December, I've announced the government plan, and 6 sites will be made available, offering some 6,750 units, together with what's available during the last term. That is the West Rail Property Development at Tsuen Wan West Station. Altogether, we will be able to offer about 2,650 flats.
In the next quarter, we will continue to offer for sale land, and in addition to that, mostly they will be residential sites. Another area is revitalization of industrial flats. We will continue to convert industrial buildings into residential use and continue to identify land for rezoning. And we have in the 2012 and 13 budget invited the URA Urban Renewal Authority to launch redevelopment projects of industrial buildings. Well, they have identified 2 targets. On the 26th of October 2012, one of the projects has commenced. It is a residential project. It will provide about 180 small and to medium-sized flats. The other project will be for office use. And point number 3 is the 36 GIC and other government sites to be converted to residential use. The Planning Department has identified 36 GIC, that is a government institution or community sites, and other government sites for residential use. It will be able to provide about 11,900 private and public housing flats. And out of the 36 sites, 26 sites will have to undergo zoning change for residential use. We will, in accordance with the statutory procedure, consult the public on the rezoning amendments. Number 4 is to explore the potential of converting industrial land or building into residential use under the planning regime and the buildings ordinance. Converting industrial buildings for residential use will have to be done in accordance with the planning ordinance and statutory plans, the buildings ordinance and its subsidiary legislation, and the conditions in the relevant land leases. However, most of the industrial buildings are located on sites with the zoning restriction, or they are not permitted to be turned into residential use. Even if residential use is permitted, the conversion would still face various technical difficulties under the building and land lease control regimes. To help address the shortage of housing supply in the short to medium term, the government is exploring possible ways to overcome these hurdles in the context of the policy on revitalization of industrial buildings to facilitate wholesale conversion of industrial buildings to transitional accommodation use on an interim basis as a stopgap measure. At the beginning of September this year, we have announced a policy of Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people. We have taken into account the fact that housing land is a scarce resource in Hong Kong. The aim of the Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people policy is to give priority to the housing needs of Hong Kong people. Land sales subject to this policy will have land sale conditions imposed. The sale and resale of flats built on these sites will be for Hong Kong permanent residents. And we will work out the implementation details, and we will incorporate the relevant land sale conditions. We have identified 2 sites in Kai Tak development area, providing small to medium-sized flats. They will be made available in the first quarter of 2013 as a pilot scheme. I ask members to support our measures. We are determined to increase supply, and we will also take the initiative to put forward for sale lands on a quarterly basis. We will continue to monitor demand and supply for housing land in the market. Thank you. Now I open the floor to questions. I suggest that each member will have 5 minutes for question and answers. For each member. We have 9 members who have signed up so far. Christopher Chung, Chen Kam Lam, Kwok-hing, Alan Leung, Fernando Cheung, James Tien, Albert Chan, Leung Kai Cheung, Kwok-hing, and Wu Chi Wai. Mr. Christopher Chung, to be followed by Mr. Chen Kam Lam. I have 2 questions. Thank you, Chairman. First, does the administration have any plans to increase supply for public housing so that they can reach the average waiting time of 3 years? The cases I have come across are those who did not get an allocation, the first allocation in the first 3 or 4 years. Number 2, sale of PRH units in Taiwan. Well, actually, I have encountered opinion that is different. We would like the Taiwan factory estate to be turned into premises for the creative industry. Say, for example, for arts groups, or for NGOs, or for them to be used as a place to start a business. Is it suitable to turn it into PRH units? We will spend a lot of money only to get 180 units. And are they with open kitchens? It's not the case that we stay there like a hotel for 2 or 3 nights. They are PRH tenants who will probably stay there for a very long time. Do you think that such design would be suitable for Hong Kong people? And I ask you to revert back to the District Council for further discussion. Secretary, I will say a few words and then I will ask the PS to supplement. The waiting time of 3 years is still the target of the HA. Our statistics show that the average waiting time is still 3 years. That is, they will get their first allocation within 3 years. For individual cases, they may have to wait for longer than 3 years, but I will ask the HA to review the process. There may be a lot of reasons why they will have to wait for more than 3 years. Say, for example, there is a specific district chosen by the applicant, or in the process, there is a time when they become ineligible, so the time has been frozen. Anyway, we stick to the target of 3 years. In relation to the conversion of Taiwan factory estate, we try to strike a balance between housing production and conservation. This is a balance, and the HA is in continuous liaison with the District Council.
Indeed, one of the reasons that we decided to hold on to the building in Taiwan was that the District Council made it very clear that they would like that building to be preserved and retained. Once we've taken that view, we have to then decide what we're going to use it for. And clearly, with the current pressure, and the Honourable Member himself made the point, we want to increase the number of public rental housing units. This is a suitable use for the site. Of course, yes, it is a public rental housing development. People will have a choice whether or not to live there, but the design that we've come up with is actually, I think, very attractive in that we'll be using the courtyard and we'll be using the site so that they will have individual bathrooms, individual kitchens, and so on. In terms of the general question of can we further increase, public rental housing, that is something that we are working with colleagues in Lands Department, Development Bureau, and the other relevant departments to identify land as possible for additional sites. We're also trying to make sure that our development program is as quick as it possibly can, so that we're bringing the units on stream as quickly as we can. And we're now down to an average cycle from the point where the land becomes available for development. It just takes us between 4.5 to 5 years. That's a very quick development program. So certainly the emphasis is on developing sites as quickly as we possibly can. Thank you.
Oh, 唔該晒。
Thank you. Secretary, anything to add? Mr. Chan? As you know, the Development Bureau endeavors to increase land supply in the short-medium term. Our policies will tie in with the relevant policies in the THB. Mr. Chan Kam Lam to be followed by Mr. Kwok-hing. So, Chairman, the two secretaries both said that they would make available land as soon as possible and build houses or units as soon as possible to meet demand. I believe that that itself is all right. But do the two secretaries know that there is still a bureaucracy in the departments and bureau? There are bureaucratic hurdles delaying such projects to be launched. Let me give you a couple of examples. First, URA. When they acquire land for redevelopment, it takes a very long time. Well, on one hand, it takes a long time for supply to be increased, and on the other hand, there are risks. So should you review the bureaucratic structure? Once a decision is made, can they compress the time for acquisition and compensation? And the other case is Yau Tong Bay in Kwun Tong. There is a large-scale development project. It's been delayed for a very long time, over 10 years. Still, it is still circulating among departments. So do you really want land to produce housing units on time, or what? What are the reasons? What are the problems? I do think that procedures should be streamlined to speed up production and to speed up redevelopment projects. And recently, we've been talking about industrial buildings conversion. We have received a lot of complaints that departments fail to coordinate. Once fire services problems have been resolved, then they will have to move on to other procedures involving other departments. This has affected our perception of your determination of converting industrial buildings into residential uses. So is there something you can do, say for example reviewing the structure or anything like that within the government? Who is to take this part? Mr. Chan. In relation to the work of the URA, I am sure you understand that when it comes to acquisition of land, they will have to conform to the statutory procedure because it involves private property rights. And individual projects have their own level of complexity and problems. On the policy bureau level, we will put in place supporting policies and give assistance as far as possible. Well, apart from projects initiated by the URA, we have also put in place a pilot scheme under which it is demand-led. In other words, owners of old buildings, if they so wish and if they can amalgamate a certain number of households, then they can ask for the URA to be involved. There are 2 sites, 2 targets identified. In the second stage, we have received very warm response. Assessments will be made. And in terms of industrial buildings, they are designed not for residential use. So apart from planning considerations in the conversion into residential use, they also have to take into account requirements under the buildings ordinance and also the fire services installations. In this regard, we are actually doing something. Just like what I said at the outset, we are exploring possible measures that can speed up the process and to provide assistance. I will ask my PS to respond to Yao Tong.
Well, generally speaking, in different districts, when we launch development plans, then we will conduct planning and work studies, and in the process, at different stages, there would be different work, including technical studies. Another one that would be more time consuming would be the public engagement exercise and also the consultation process. Normally speaking, well, where there are planning and development projects, we will have at least 1, 2, or even 3 PEE, and we will allow for more time for the public to give us their positive input. And therefore, time-wise, we understand that that might take a bit longer. But then in terms of the work that will have to be done, well, as soon as the development study and also the technical study have been completed, we will immediately press ahead with the PEE in order to facilitate the completion of the process so that we can start works as soon as possible. Chairman, for the Yao Tong project, it's been delayed for more than 10 years now, and it's a private it's a private project, so what has that got to do with public engagement? And therefore, with regard to the bureaucracy, that has given rise to a lot of delays and obstacles and so on. I hope that you will have to come up with some solution to streamline the process. All right, we'll take it up and we will follow up on that. All right, any further follow-up? If not, then Mr. Kwok-hing and then Alan Leung. Thank you, Chairman. I have a question for the administration. That is how we are able to take effective measures so that for those 200,000 on the waiting list for PRH can be dealt with as soon as possible. Because if the administration still insists on coming up with only 15,000 units together with 8,000 surrender flats, then you will only be able to have some 23,000 units available for allocation. I'm glad that Mr. James Tian, who moved an amendment to my motion last Wednesday, resulting in his amendment being passed. You can see different parties in this council would like the administration to expeditiously adopt measures in order to resolve this problem of a long queue under the waiting list. Of course, I welcome and I'm grateful to the administration's acceptance of our proposal, that is with regard to the Chai Wan Industrial Estate. It's been converted into interim housing for singletons. We believe that that is necessary, and we are glad that you are prepared to accept it. So, are you able to think out of the box for the other projects? Because right now we have many flatted factory buildings that are vacant. They have not been put to use at all. So, would you be prepared to buy or even rent such factory buildings so that you can make use of those resources, and then you can come up with some interim housing in order to resolve the housing needs of those on the waiting list? So can you be more innovative in a sense. Because in the past, you managed to come up with some interim housing and you said that there would be problems. But then for these factory buildings, they've been left vacant for a long time because most of the factories have moved northward to the mainland. So are you able to buy these factory buildings and then you can convert them and then they can be turned into interim housing for these for those on the waiting list? So are you prepared to think out of the box, Secretary? Chairman, I'll say a few words on the waiting list first. Indeed, there are some 200,000 people on the waiting list. And as far as the administration is concerned, in terms of providing public rental housing, that would be quite a challenge. Well, out of the 200,000, about 43% are the so-called non-elderly singleton applicants. And we do have this quota and point system. And at the motion debate held on Wednesday this week, I already explained that under the current allocation policy, the administration will give priority to households or family applicants. Anyway, for singletons, we do understand that those would cover people from different age groups and different groups in the community, and therefore we'll see what we can do under the review of the LTHS for the older non-elderly singleton applicants, what we can do for them. But then at present we are still holding on to the target of making the first offer within 3 years for those on the waiting list. But then if the queue gets longer, then of course that will put a lot of pressure to bear on this pledge, and therefore we will have to identify more land for public rental housing development. And through the resumption of HOS, we hope that there would be a greater turnover of PRH units so that more units can be made available for allocation. That's very important. We do understand your concerns and we are grateful to your input, and I believe that the direction that we have taken is in line with what you just said. Well, for conversion of industrial buildings, as Mr. Chen said, it would involve different aspects, but then what you said would also be considered. I'll see if Mr. Chen has anything to add. Thank you, Chairman. Well, the policy direction for us is we will look at the policy and also the measure to see what can be done to facilitate the conversion of these industrial buildings so that they can be used for residential purposes. But then for the time being, we do not have plans to buy or rent such industrial buildings because that would also involve other complicated issues. But then for industrial buildings, the conversion and also the rezoning, well, that is also one of the measures that we have introduced, and in terms of resource redeployment, we will also have to consider it more comprehensively. I really think that you will have to think out of the box, because if you are not able to put up buildings yourselves, then for renting or buying industrial buildings, that should also be considered. I hope that in the new term of government, well, if you want to have public support, then you will have to be able to think out of the box instead of just insisting on the traditional approach. Next, Alan Leung and then Fernando Cheung. Alan Leung. Thank you, Chairman. I have a couple of points on land supply and a couple of points on how the existing policies were to be implemented. First, on increasing land supply, I'd like to know this because recently from some press reports, I noticed that for village house land in the new territories, in other words, they are intended for small house development. Is the administration adopting some new thinking so that higher or taller buildings will be built in exchange for those rights? Because if that can be done, then quite a sizable area of empty land can be released for other purposes. And also, we have also learned from media reports that developers have been holding up a lot of sites, and the amount is very substantial. So has the administration considered adopting administrative measures? Because on the mainland, if you hold up land for too long, then administratively there will be some incentives for you to develop these sites. So have you considered those? And also on enforcement of the existing policies, the two questions are, well, for the 5,000 units, So for the white farm applicants who will be able to draw ballots and then they'll be able to buy secondary HOS flats, I do not know why they can be allowed to sell the flats within 2 years so long as they can pay the premium, because that would run counter to your policy objective. Because if you allow them, if you think that they'll be buying the no-frill flats for self-occupation, why is it that they'll be allowed to speculate on the flats again within 2 years so long as they can pay the premium? And also, I've made this point, and I'm sure Professor Chang has heard it, that is for the 39 TPS estates. There are still some surplus flats. For example, in Choi Ping North, according to the information provided by the Secretary, some 3,184 units have not been sold. But then for Choi Ping South, that is just a block away. Well, it's not covered by the 39 TPS estates. But then for Choi Ping South, according to some Kaifong, they would like to buy some of those flats. So will you allow them to walk uphill a little bit so that they will be able to buy the flats in Choi Ping North, so that the residents concerned can then move out and then move into Choi Ping South? That is the unit that the sitting tenant is now staying. Mr. Chen, with regard to small house in the new territories, I agree that the small house policy should be reviewed because it's been in place for 40 years, and from the planning angle, from land resources angle, and also from the overall interest and demand of the community, we believe that there is a need for us to review the policy. But then as far as the present situation is concerned, the review will involve not just legal issues. We will also have to consult the stakeholders and the parties to be affected. As to the point made by Mr. Alan Leung, we have jotted that down. Concerning developers holding up land, well, if it's land sold by the administration, or if the developers would like to redevelop the land, and if they want to modify the lease terms, then there is a validity period within which the developer will have to put up the flats. So there is a development time frame for them to put up flats. But then for other private sites, if there are transactions of those sites, for example, if it's sale of farmland, and if the farmland has not been rezoned in our OCP, if it's still zoned farmland, then there is no policy for the developer to convert the farmland into residential site, and then flats will have to be completed within a certain period of time, because in terms of the OCP, it's still zoned agriculture. Professor Chang, concerning the sale of secondary HOS flats to white farm applicants. Well, let me supplement on this first. With regard to the sale of secondary HOS flats to white farm applicants without payment of premium, well, according to the discussion in the HA, the sale restriction period will be confined to 2 years. I understand that they've already taken reference from the existing policy on HOS flats, because all along the 2-year period applies to all prospective buyers of HOS flats, but then we are not encouraging them to sell them after 2 years. In fact, with the introduction of the SSD, we hope that they will not be selling that because we hope that all buyers will basically be occupiers. And also for the 39 TPS estates, there are still some surplus units in those estates. So for sitting tenants that are not living in those estates, will they be allowed to buy up flats in those TPS estates? Well, the original intention is to allow the sitting tenant who is living in the unit to buy the unit that he is living. And therefore, what you proposed just now would be somewhat different from what we had intended to do under the original TPS estate. But then I understand that your suggestion will also mean that there will be greater turnover of the flats, and that's something that we will consider. Next, Fernando Cheung. Thank you, Chairman. Well, on the waiting list is a record high. We have some 200,000 people or applicants on the waiting list. And if you look at the 10 initiatives, for the conversion of Chai Wan Factory Estate by 2015, you'll be able to come up with some 180 flats. So this is a drop in the bucket. So why are you still insisting on the 15,000 flats a year? Why can't you increase supply? Because if that continues, then according to those from the sector, it means that the backlog can only be cleared after 16 years. And for those most needy applicants, they are living in substandard living. And according to the administration, there are some 70,000 people living in subdivided flats or cubicle apartments or rooftop apartments. So they are living in substandard housing. So do you have any target to phase them out so that you'll be able to reduce such flats which is not suitable for people to inhabit? And also, according to some reports, the vacancy rate of PRH flats is up to 1.6%. In other words, out of the 680,000 units, you have over 10,000 units that are now left vacant. So how are you going to improve the situation? And in terms of rents, yes, as you can see, between 2009 and 2012, according to the Rating and Valuation Department, the average increase was 57%, and for small flats, that is under 400 square feet, during the same period, it went up by some 61%. Well, you've been saying that you're not or you're reluctant to relaunch rent control. Then what can be done? Because many people are suffering from high rents, and the rents are continuing to rise. How are you going to help them?
Ming Pao reported that altogether 46 sites was sold in the past 2 years. They are government initiated, but only one out of the 46 has work started. So is it the case that there are some problems, or you're just dragging your feet? If that is the case, would you consider land idling tax to urge the developers to start work as soon as possible? You said there are altogether 36 GIC sites. 26 sites will have to undergo zoning change. Where are these sites? What community facilities or healthcare facilities are affected? And there are 3 hospitals planned in Kai Tak area. Will they have any impact on these hospitals? Mr. Zhang. Yes, the waiting time for those on the waiting list has been longer and longer. We have discussed it in the last council meeting. Demand is tight, but the supply is tight. And if we are to increase a PRH production, we will have to identify sites in a very short time. And that is something that we are unable to do at the moment. So it is inevitable, and we endeavor at the same time to increase housing supply for PRH units. In relation to vacancy rate is only about 1%. We think that is on the low side. 1% means that we will take a snapshot and look at what flats are vacant, and they may be vacant for a number of reasons. Say, for example, they are under renovation. So of course, we will try to allocate vacant flats. And even for those that are unpopular under the express allocation scheme, we will have special arrangements to allocate less popular flats. In relation to land vacancy, in relation to rent control, of course, as we've discussed in the council meeting, we will monitor the situation. Rent control is a complicated issue, and there are different views among legislators, and the same goes for the entire society. In relation to subdivided flats, my understanding is that if it involves safety reasons, then it is an enforcement issue. Perhaps I will ask Mr. Chan to supplement. With people living in substandard living conditions, this issue has been repeatedly discussed in the LegCo, where safety, fire hazard, fire risks and hygiene hazards are involved, of course, we will take action. We have a plan to conduct inspection and, if necessary, to take enforcement actions. And in relation to Dr. Feng's question about Mingpao and the 36 GIC sites. About the 36 GIC sites, 10 of them can go ahead, and we have made announcements. And in relation to the remaining 26, we have to conduct consultation and preparatory work in different stages. In due course, we will make announcements. We have to go through the relevant procedures before they can be rezoned. It can't simply be done behind closed doors. The 36 sites do not include sites on which the 3 hospitals will be located. About the Mingpao report, from end of April to 2010 to now, there are altogether 48 sites sold by the government, 42 of which applications have been made in relation to plans, and 22 of them have been approved, and in relation to the remaining 8, and the application has been turned down because they have failed to conform to the relevant buildings ordinance. Out of the 48 sites, 5 have got approval from the buildings department to have superstructure constructed. And in relation to the other 2, pre-consent applications have been made. For 12 sites, foundation work has commenced, and they have a time period within which the work has to start. So far, we have failed to see deliberate holding or delaying on the part of developers out of the sites that have been sold. Mr. James Tian to be followed by Mr. Michael Tian to be followed by Mr. Albert Chen. Well, in relation to sites or units sold to mainland investors or expatriates, well, I think for mainlanders, they don't really have they don't have a strong voice in relation to the buyer's stamp duty, because I suppose the administration has already got the approval from the central authority. But among expatriates, they were quite surprised when it comes to the imposition of the BSD. Well, if it is for the need of Hong Kong people, well, that is beyond criticism. And have you asked what Hong Kong people would like? Say, for example, those on the medium or lower end, that's for Hong Kong people, and more expensive ones, that they are mainly for expatriates. So where would you draw the line? Of course, I have discussed with them, wherever you draw the line at 10 million or 12 million, there will always be controversy. I also engage in land development. I would like to ask the administration, have you asked developers? Well, they say they would give you a reply in 2 months, but they will wait till it is the last day of the 2-month period before they give you an answer. So they will just wait till it is the last day when they give you a reply. Say, for example, I received the approval on the 9th of October, but the letter is dated the 9th of October. Do you think developers would argue? Is it the case that the post office has taken 1 month to deliver the letter? So where is it the date when we actually receive the approval, the date on the letter, or the date when we receive it? And when it comes to Hong Kong land for Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people, well, should you specify it to target first-time owners? Because, say, for example, I have money, I want to buy 20 properties, and am I allowed to do so? When it comes to the compensation of, the mortgage of mostly 70%, now there are a lot of sites for sale. there is excessive capital in the banking system. They have a lot of funds waiting to be lent out because they have not exceeded the 70%. Well, now there are restrictions, requirements requiring banks to not lend out more than 70% of the funds to properties. And when it comes to buildings ordinance and planning ordinance, can I ask, could you maybe adopt administrative measures to expedite it? Well, point number 5 says that you will actively consider redevelopment of industrial land or building. And if the process is not expedited, I think it will take more than a year. Mr. Zhang, I will answer BSD. For the others, it will be better for Mr. Chen to take them up. When we consider imposing BSD on non-permanent Hong Kong citizens or companies, we have considered different alternatives. And we have also considered exemption given to local companies. But we realize that there are a lot of technical problems involved and there will be loopholes. BSD is not a deliberate attempt to discriminate against expatriates or mainlanders. We think that the property market has an impact on financial stability and economic performance if a seriously bullish sentiment continues. And also the continuous rise of property prices. We have explained to foreign investors and also consulate generals. And of course, when the situation becomes normal again, we will revert back to the time before. Mr. Chan, the question was whether we can draw a line under which the BSD will not apply. What we have to consider at the same time, the shortage of housing supply is as a whole, not just in the market for, say, small and medium flats. We have to take into consideration housing need of Hong Kong people. In my line of work, I have contact with consulate generals, and they've asked us, and they said that they understand why we made this decision. Mr. Tian asked if the government has waited till the last day before a reply is made, or the date on the letter is very different from the date when they actually received the letter. We will follow that up. I can say that when it comes to housing and land, we have given it our best. We have pulled all the plugs out. Well, when it comes to conversion, we have to go through the statutory planning procedure. In other areas, we see that implementation of the policy is somewhat different from what we expected. We will, from an administrative perspective, see what more we can do. Say, for example, for lighting, for fire services, we will consider them. For Hong Kong property, for Hong Kong people, I will defer to my PS. The policy objective of the Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people is to give priority to the housing need of Hong Kong people. The restriction is to restrict flats built on these sites to be sold only to Hong Kong permanent residents for a certain period of time. This is we don't have any plans to impose further restrictions, say, for example, to impose the restrictions in relation to first-time purchase or any similar ones. These two are pilots projects. Mr. Albert Chan, The approach, the attitude, and work taken by the administration is very disappointing. We are experiencing a serious housing problem that is unprecedented in the past 40 years. We have now resorted to very vague descriptions of the housing problem. You said there are 1,000 units, 700 units, and this side and that side, and the URA can turn aside to produce 180 units. Now, you made them sound like they are your key areas. We're talking about over 100,000 people waiting on the waiting list. And in the past, prior to Mr. Michael Soon's 9 measures, there are 70 to 90,000 a year. And the worst year recently in terms of house unit production has dropped to less than 20,000 in terms of in the public and private housing market. So we are experiencing serious problems. So let's set aside the coming 10 years. What about the coming 3 to 4 years? What is the supply forecast? If you don't give land to the THB, then you can't produce housing. But you keep saying that, well, you are doing your best. But can you give us some specific figures? All right, if you can't make a forecast of 5 years, what about 3 years? The future supply, so that we get an idea.
I've been criticizing the 2 bureau directors because you're not those from the profession, and you're actually facing the most acute problems in that case, and you're having 2 non-professionals or laymen leading the professions. So how can you be rest assured that you'll be able to do a good job in increasing housing? Because before Michael Soon's announcement of the 9 initiatives, you had been able to do it, and many officials were still in the incumbent government. So how are you able to tell us that in the next 3 years there will be some improvement and there will be some adjustments to the production? Yes, who is going to speak first? I'll say a few words. Chairman, well, Mr. Chen said that the current problem is very serious. As I said, in a motion debate on Wednesday, I already shared with you, and I agree that the present situation is a very serious one. And in terms of land supply, in terms of the forecast, will we be able to do a better job? I'll defer to Mr. Chen, the Bureau Director. Chairman, in terms of the shortage of land for development, yes, it will take time to resolve it. Well, please do not lead us up the garden path. Please just give us the program for the next 3 to 5 years in terms of land supply. All right, if you're not able to do the job, just find someone else to do it instead of just giving us very abstract remarks. Please do not use sophistry. Just tell us, how are you able to put up flats for the residents to live in? Chairman, whether it's the Chief Executive or our Bureau, but do you have plans for the next 3 or 5 years on land supply? Do you have that? Well, he's telling us, if you are not able to tell us, then just shut up and step down. Well, we adopt a multi-pronged approach so that there will be short, medium to long-term measures in terms of land supply. But that if the administration doesn't even have a 3 to 5 year land supply plan, then the secretary should have stepped down. He should have resigned. He should have bowed out, because you've been in place or in office for several months and still you're not able to come up with this plan. So what kind of secretary is that? All right, you have interrupted. He hasn't had a chance to answer the question. I really hope that members will allow us to say what we would like to say in terms of land supply. As you know, every year we will announce the land sales program for the coming year, and earlier on we have already responded to members' questions, and we said that with regard to certain land issue or information, we've already release certain details. But then for the next 3 to 5 years land sale program, we are not going to announce that yet because this is market sensitive information. In the past, you did provide information. Well, the administration would announce a 5-year plan, and even for housing supply, there would be a rolling program. So please do not tell us if you do not know it. Please do not lead us the garden path. Please do not mislead the public, because in the past there was announcement on the next 5 years plan. But then in terms of the justifications, it's ridiculous because he said that this is market sensitive. Well, in the past, you did provide the information, right? Well, as we know, for Hong Kong's property market, well, the main developers, you know who they are. And in terms of land supply, for short term, within 3 years, the land sales program, well, the information, if that's disclosed, then I'm of the view that that's not in line with public interest. Thank you, Chairman. Kenneth Leung, and then KK Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to see that for the MHPP scheme has been changed, because initially when it was first launched at the HA, I already said that this is neither here nor there, this is neither fish nor fowl, and I can't see how it can be implemented. But now the nature has been changed. It's actually going to be a subsidized housing scheme for sale. And also, under the MHPP, 4,000 flats will be coming on stream, and they will be offered to the market for sale. But then the first question is, well, if the waiting list for PRH is so long, then would the administration consider, that is under the MHPP scheme, for the 4,000 flats that are going to be put up? Yes, the number is not high, but then the plot ratio can be changed so that they can be changed into PRH flats, and that's number one. And if the administration is not prepared to do that, then why not? And the second question is, well, under the MHPP, well, you said that the targets would be those earning some $40,000 a month. So in terms of the positioning, when compared to the sandwich class housing scheme run by the Housing Society, is that more or less the same, or is there any difference? And the third question is, as I can see from some reports, that the administration really intended to relaunch the sandwich class housing scheme. So can the administration tell us a bit more about that? All right, thank you. Professor Chairman, during the last term of government in 2010, it proposed the MHPP scheme, and it said that there would be 5,000 units, and it didn't say that it's going to be a continuous program. But then during this term of government, as Mr. Leung has just pointed out, we believe that we should turn the rental flats into flats for sale, and we expect that by the end of this year, the Cheng Lok Street project will be put up for sale. And then for the remaining 4,000 flats, we also intend to sell them at discounted price. So they're going to be like HOS scheme. As for the actual pricing, we are still considering that. As regards the plot ratio, whether it's the PRH or HOS or public or private housing, well, if it's PRH flats, then we will try to maximize the plot ratio. That's always the intention. Well, in a community, there are different groups needing HOS flats and PRH flats, and therefore we will have to adopt a balanced approach. With regard to the HKHS SCHS, well, initially when the HKHS ran is SCHS schemes, well, the maximum income limit was up to $60,000 a month, and on public occasions, I've already said that the administration did not have any intention of relaunching the SCHS, but then for the middle income group earning not too much, they do have this housing need, and they would like to buy their own homes. That's why, in considering the MHPP, we will consider any alternative approach. Thank you. Is there any supplementary question? If not, then next, Dr. Kwok-hing, and then Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Chairman. After reading the government's documents, the only one response that I can have is disappointment, because on the 30th of August, the Chief Executive announced the short to medium-term measures. Well, only about 20,000 plus flats can be put up, And before 1997, just 1 year, the housing supply, I'm sure you know it better than myself, we're talking about some 60,000 flats a year before 1997. And if you look at your short to medium term, that is in the next 3 or 4 years, well, that would be close to the end of your term. And if you still insist on reviewing the LTHS as a measure to tackle the existing problem, I don't think the distant water will be able to put out the near fire. I think the administration said that well, you should not attribute everything to the administration, but that if the developers were to develop the sites that they had, they would be able to come up with some 600, 700,000 units. And you just said that in 5 years you'll be able to put up some 65,000 units. Well, you dare not disclose anything further on land supply. I think the situation is really very bad. So in the face of developers hoarding up land, what measures will the administration be able to take to tackle the problem? And also the Bureau Director is telling us that you have 2,000, sometimes less than 400 hectares of land in your land reserve. And last time when Mr. Chen was here, all of a sudden he said that there would be some 2,500 hectares of land waiting to be developed. So do you have a list on the farm sites available? Then that would reassure the public that land would be available for development. And also under the application list system, and also in the land sale program, well, there are many sites that nobody would be interested in. They have not applied for those sites to be made available. But then the administration is short of sites for PRH and HOS. Well, these sites are there in the list. So why can't you use them for PRH or HOS development? Because in the past there was one site in Taiwan, and you said that the price was not right, but then and therefore they were not willing to do it. But then I think the administration is waiting for a good price for the site to be sold. And according to some analysts, actually the reason why we have this high land premium situation, and according to many developers, it's not just the problem of developers. In fact, it's the administration which is continuing the British colonial policy of a high land premium policy, and time has changed. Why are you still insisting on this policy? Are you being fair to the public? Well, for the two bureau directors, you only have about 4+ years to go before the end of your office. So during the next 1 or 2 years, if we continue to see housing problem, property prices not being improved, then indeed you should have told the public, or you should have said this to the public, that is, you should take the responsibility. Well, I'm not suggesting that you should step down, but then being accountability official, should you have taken up the accountability or responsibility, because you've been the two bureau directors responsible for this very top priority of the government, then in your mind, do you have any target? All right, definitely for the targets that you've just spelled out, nobody would say yes to it, because for those living in subdivided flats, for those waiting for PRH or HOS flats, or those hoping to buy a flat, well, in Tuen Mun, you're talking about some $10,000 per square feet. It's really crazy. So the prices have skyrocketed. They are already astronomical figure. So if you're not able to do it properly, then would you admit that in terms of your housing policy and land policy is a failure, and therefore you will have to take up the responsibility? Who is to answer? Land supply, Mr. Chen? Chairman, on how much land is available? Well, not just today. I think earlier on at the motion debate, and also in answering oral questions, we have repeatedly answered the same questions. Well, however hard I try to explain the situation, apparently the understanding is quite different from what we said. I'm not going to speculate why that has been the case. Well, in terms of land sales, well, we do have this application list system, and the table is open to the public. And every year, we would also announce the land sales program for the coming year, and then on a quarterly basis we would also say in advance as to what we're going to do in the coming quarter. And the main reason is that we will have to respond to the market needs, and where necessary we will have to make adjustments as to the actual sites that will be put up for sale. But how about coming up with a list of farm land? So do you have any land that is do you have a list of disposed sites so that they can be put up for sale? Well, for a list of disposed sites, well, you can refer to the application list system, and you will have to refer to that chart. All the information will be available. Professor Chang, in the past, as a result of land supply for public rental housing, if there was a shortage of that, then after assuming office for just 3 months, I can't all of a sudden come up with all the sites. But then I can only say that this term of government attaches huge importance to housing, and therefore, within this term, we will continue to work hard to identify land. What about the application list system? How about converting some of the sites into PRH or HOS schemes? Because some of the sites have been there for a while and they have not been put up for sale. Well, as the Secretary just explained, when necessary, the administration will be able to put up these sites for sale on the application list. Wu Chi-wai and then Gary Fan.
My question is rather simple. Yesterday I heard that there are 2,500 hectares of land that can be made available. I believe most of them are potential sites. The Secretary mentioned that it takes time to make available land, but if you only rely on the Works Department under the Development Bureau to turn the sites into disposed land, it will take a long time. So would you consider this? That is, based on the demand of public housing or PRH or HOS sites, they will identify potential sites and expedite the process for turning the sites from potential sites to disposed sites. In relation to the 2,500 hectares, I'm afraid I will have to repeat this again to avoid misunderstanding. We're talking about, in relation to the 2,500 hectares of land, the planning department is doing certain work on them. They include anti-northeast, Tung Chung, Hong Shui Q, quarry sites, Kam Sheung Road and Park Hang, and North District Yuen Long, some open storage sites and abandoned agricultural land. They will be rezoned, and also the review on green belt, GIC sites, industrial sites. So they cannot be made available instantly. This is something that we have to work on. We have close liaison with the THB. And in terms of land supply, you have mentioned in relation to the point you've mentioned, we will try our best to complement their work. I know that there are a lot of different works, but my impression is that if you lump them all to the Development Bureau, then it will slow down your ability to handle them all. In relation to housing supply for public housing supply, it involves making available land. Maybe you can assign delegate some work to the HA to speed up the process. In relation, the departments are working closely under the two bureaux.
For a number of the public housing sites, Housing Department has taken on the coordination work to try and give assistance to the Development Bureau relevant departments. So we're doing, for example, planning studies. We're doing coordination with the relevant departments to make sure these things are taken forward quickly. And we're also working with outside agencies, not just internal agencies, to speed up the process. So, for example, we have one planning study going forward in Yuen Long where we're doing in conjunction with the Science Park because there's a mutual benefit from the two sites. So the sort of idea that you're talking about of a properly coordinated approach is already taking place.
I have another question. We've been talking about relaxing HOS secondary market to white farmers. Well, I understand there is a motion, and I understand the administration is going to continue anyway. There is housing need. We're talking about a large amount of housing stock of PRH and HOS units. So will they consider putting them out in the rental market before they're made available for sale in a way to regulate the rental market? Mr. Zhang. Allowing HOS flats with premium not pay to rent them out in the rental market is a complicated issue because the objective of the HOS is for home ownership. The ban to sublet the flat is a condition, and it is also set down in the law. If we allow them to rent it out, that means that they can make a profit without paying the premium. And I believe that it will cause controversy in society. Once they have paid the premium, then the flat is no different from any other flat in the private market. But the law stipulates that where premium is not paid, then they are not allowed to rent it out. And of course, I'm not going to say that we won't consider anything, but we have to work within the policy restrictions and the law. Mr. Gary Fan, I have 3 questions. One in relation to short term, the other two to medium and long term. Previously, the administration announced that there are 4 sites in Tseung Kwan O South. The PR, the plot ratio, will be increased to respond to the public aspiration of increasing housing supply. I've read the administration's document. For some sites, the increase in PR is not for residential use. They are for shopping malls. Can the administration clarify? There are altogether 14 sites in Tseung Kwan O South. Out of these sites, in the past 3 or 7 years, they have been planned after the HOS was halted. So one site is for PRH, whereas the remaining 13 sites are for private housing development. They are along the waterfront. Will they reconsider to rezone those sites for private housing to, say, HOS flats to meet demand? If they are along the waterfront, very likely the sites will be turned into housing for the luxurious market. So will the administration consider that? My next question. I see that this paper is on short and medium-term measures. Is it the case that the administration will, in relation to the 800 hectares of abandoned agricultural land in the new territories, become part of the long-term measures? That's why it is not mentioned in the short and medium term, because these sites are abandoned agricultural land. They have been turned into open storage for containers, for waste, electronic goods, for car parks. So has the administration have any plan for these sites? My next question. It is the administration's responsibility to account in a transparent way, planning for land use in the coming 5 to 10 years. Say, for example, land in the urban area, vacant residential land, how the size, total size of these, planning timetable. We have to have important information disseminated in a timely manner to the public, because when it comes to developing land, it has to be rational and reasonable. The current and the former Secretary for Development said we have this given information about a number of flats to be built from the land reserve. Mr. Mack said that there are about 900 hectares. And the incumbent secretary said there is 391 hectares. Still, even for the 391 hectares, is quite large. We're talking about 20 Kwok-hing. Someone has made calculations that a maximum of 260,000 residential units will be made available, so housing about 800,000 or 870,000 people. We have now 7.1 million people, and by 2041 there will be 8.47 million people. So with the 400 hectares of land building houses, I think they will be able to meet demand. But publicity machine has been turned on. There are APIs giving information that we have a shortage in supply. They want to publicize about the NT-Northeast project. So will they give us more information in a transparent manner in the coming 5 to 10 years? Say, for example, large-scale development projects. Mr. Chen, in a meeting of the development panel, you have repeated what you've said today. You said that the market changes. So you can't foresee land demand or housing demand in the coming 5 to 10 years. That's why you can't give a forecast or estimate for Hong Kong people, for Hong Kong land for Hong Kong people. But the administration is putting a lot of resources for the NT-Northeast project as long as 10 to 20 years in the future. But when it comes to land supply or Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people, you can't give us a clear picture. I think it is illogical. Thank you. Mr. Chen. In relation to Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people, it's not that we don't know how to do it. It's just that it is not suitable for us to set down a fixed target. In relation to 391 hectares, 391.5 hectares, that is equal to a certain number of Kwok-hings, I think it is not exact. Well, you can find a distribution of the 391 hectares of land on the internet. If you want to find a site as big as Kwok-hing, you will have difficulties because they are fragmented and scattered. And of course, we all want our living standard improved. Development density in the old times cannot be just simply adopted. In Hong Kong, Hong Kong Planning Vision 2030, over the different times we have disseminated information, say for example the 2,500 hectares of land and the various short, medium, long-term measures. You'll find that in the coming 5 to 10 years, a general picture of land supply. And in terms of the short term, say in the coming 2 to 3 years, like what Mr. Chan said, I think from the perspective of public interest, I'm afraid I cannot divulge the information of the land sale. And in relation to the 14 harbourfront sites, whether they can be turned into HOS flats, we will look at it. And in terms of the Chong Kwan South sites, and there's a minor relaxation of PR. Well, the instruction we give to the planning department is in relation to residential sites and about shopping malls. I don't know whether the adjustment has been made while they have been working on it. I will go back to it. But the focus is still on residential land. Anything to add, Mr. Chow? No. Let me read out some more names. Paul Tse, Lam Tai Fai, Lo Wai Kwok, James Teen, Mr. Porter. Well, I heard that we are experiencing really difficult times that have not been seen in the past 40 years. We will also have to look at the neighboring areas. If you look at old photographs of Hong Kong, you see that Hong Kong has come a long way. In the past, in a lot of areas, say in Diamond Hill, we see a lot of squatter houses. If we put this into perspective, not just looking at the past 7 years, say for example the inaction of Donald Trum's time, that our time has turned for the worse. Hurdles, there are more hurdles, there are higher public expectations, and stronger resistance when the administration is going to implement something. We do need a balance. If we get bogged down with criticizing the administration and just lashing out on our officials that they should step down, I think it is meaningless. From what I've heard, information has been given in relation to land supply. Mr. Gary Fan mentioned about long term. If we are to about software, if we just rely on hardware, say for example identifying sites, well, it may not be very effective. But we want something that can be instantly effective. The CE proposed BSD, enhanced SSD, Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people, or even rent control. I have reservation because Hong Kong is a free society. If you announce policies regardless of long-term development benefits or what the international arena sees us, there will be far-reaching implications. If we look solely at supply without looking at demand, then it is not a complete picture. For certain groups, say for example elderly people, they don't necessarily have to live in Hong Kong. If we relax restrictions on OAA or CSSA, or if we make arrangement in terms of elderly home, if we can make arrangements and do some things across the border, then we will be able to allay the high demand. And it will make it easier for us to resolve housing problems.
For example, in terms of tax concessions, and you can also encourage people, in particular those who do not have to go to work, they can move northward so that they will not be fighting for land that is already in short supply here in Hong Kong. Worldwide, even in the most advanced economies, they are encountering the same problem, and they have to move people from the most expensive land to the less expensive areas, and Hong Kong has already reached that stage, and therefore we will have to think along those lines instead of just adopting the traditional approach, trying to identify land and put up flats. And I'd also like to give some comment on the issue about industrial buildings, about conversion of industrial buildings into residential uses. You said that it's an interim measure, but then apparently there are a lot of constraints and restrictions, and by the time when you're able to really convert them, is already not within the near term. So with regard to the restrictions, what can be done about it? Well, even if you're not able to convert the whole block, what about individual flats? Can you give them more flexibility so that individual owners can convert their flats for residential uses? Well, I think I've already used up my time, and I don't think my answers, my points need to be answered. And there is also a mismatch right now because in the better environment in the NT, you're actually trying to encourage industrial developments and also innovative industries to be developed there. Well, that is good. But then traditionally, for industrial areas, we are actually thinking about how they can be converted into residential uses, even though they might not be that suitable. So there is a mismatch here. Well, yes, some industries might be considering coming back to Hong Kong, and by then, where are we going to find the sites for them? And therefore, we will have to have a longer-term vision instead of just adopting a knee-jerk reaction to this. And I think the situation is not that bad, and of course, there is always room for better things to be done. Yes, Professor Chiang? Yes, I'll be brief in responding to the point about making the best use of industrial flats and so on. Mr. Paul Chair made a proposal, and I agree with the overall direction, because we are not just thinking about putting up PRH flats. How are we able to make better use of the existing resources, and can we offer more incentives? Yes, those will be what we will be thinking. For example, some can be done in kind, other can be done through modification of a policy, and be more flexible about how those policies can be implemented. So we'll be adopting a multi-pronged approach. Yes, Mr. Chen, do you have anything to add? No. Next, Lam Tai Fai and another member. Chairman, many people in Hong Kong and even for mainlanders, they are very concerned and worried about whether the SAR government is able to resolve the severe problem in relation to housing and land supply. We are all waiting to see what it's going to do. And as I said on Wednesday, I hope that there will be a timetable and also the quantity and also a roadmap as to what's going to be done in the next few years, so that people will have some expectation as to when they can be allocated a PRH flat and so on. And if you can't come up with such a timetable, then everybody will be very anxious because there is no prospect whatsoever. And to come up with such a blueprint, you will have to work out your land reserve. How much land is available in your land reserve? Just now, in answer to Dr. Kwok-hing's question, Mr. Chen said that there might be different interpretations, and therefore he didn't want to spend more time on it. I think this is not going to work, because if people do not understand what you said, you will have to explain things until such time when they understand it. Well, even if Dr. Kwok-hing, who is so intelligent, if he's not able to understand it, then I'm sure many people out there will not be able to understand it. And therefore, whenever there are things that people do not understand, the only thing that you can do is to explain until they understand. And also, if you're not able to sort out your land reserve, then how can you know how much land is available and what land can be rezoned and where the sites can have the plot ratio modified? So you will have to show your strength. You will have to consider your supply. And if you do not know your strengths, then how can you come up with policies to resolve the problem? If you just look at the demand, you will also have to have a very good idea as to what is available for supply, and therefore you will have to come up with a blueprint so that everybody will know exactly what is going to happen. And also, I'd like to comment on the Hong Kong P for Hong Kong residents or Hong Kong people. So what is meant by land according to the government? Yes, I understand that this policy is to give priority to Hong Kong permanent residents. I'm not trying to divide Hong Kong people, and of course there are also locally born Hong Kong people. But then, since the reunification, we have 150 new arrivals from the mainland, and after 7 years they also become Hong Kong permanent residents. So is it that they would also be eligible? And many of them are actually the well-off residents. So how are you going to draw the line in order to help those with genuine need? That's my next question. And also, just now, from what I heard, I don't know which of you, whether it's Mr. Paul Chen who said this. All right, you said that you'll be taking the initiative to sell the land, and after the 10 initiatives by C.Y. Leung, Mr. John Zhang has also introduced the 2 measures. Yes, for confidentiality reason, you're not going to sound this out with developers, and there is no reason why you should have informed them in advance. But then after you've rolled out these measures, you don't know how much, by what margin property prices will be coming down, so they'll be buying up land. But then if they are not going to put up flats for sale, because they'll be holding the land or holding up the land, then what's the point? Because for PRH flats, you put up flats for sale, but then for private land, the longer they can hold on to it, the better, because they don't know when you're going to lift the policy, because everybody will be adopting a wait-and-see attitude. So is it that it's just wishful thinking that you think that you'll be able to resolve the problem? And also, I hope that the 2 bureau directors can help me in clarifying this, because I'm also confused. Because all along, after you've announced certain policy, after you've given some views, and then Michael Choi would be saying this at different forums and then on different occasions and through the media, he would be making known his views on whether it's the Kai-Tak Town and also the revitalization of the 5,000 HOS flats and so on. I don't know what role is he playing. So is he the spokesperson for land supply and housing supply? So why is it that he always came out to make some remarks, and then often the time he would also stir up a lot of trouble and also give rise to spark a lot of controversy? Yes, I'm not saying that he doesn't have freedom of speech. I also have my freedom of speech, but then who should have been the spokesperson? Because this is a very important subject, and he's making a lot of remarks, causing a lot of controversy and so on. Is he just sounding out or what? and because you two are laymen and you do not know the trade, and therefore you're trying to get someone who knows it to come forward to say something, because he's making remarks day in day out on radio and other programs. I don't know whether or not he's telling what the administration has in mind. Professor Chang, I'll first respond to the last point made by Mr. Lam Tai Fai. Well, Mr. Michael Choi is one of the HA members. He's also a member of the steering committee on the review of LTHS. And as Mr. Lam Tai Fai just said, as an individual, he has his right, he has his freedom of speech, and we have not asked him to do the sounding out. And it's not that we've asked him to do something which is not convenient for the two bureau directors to do. And whether or not the public would accept what he said, the public have the freedom to decide. Mr. Paul Chan, well, on the blueprint, if Mr. Michael Choi, well, because we have sounded that out to him, and then he made those remarks, then you would not have seen a situation whereby what actually happens with Kai Tak City is not the same as what he said. In other words, we do not have to take heed of what he's going to say in the future. He's not our spokesperson anyway. All right, on land sales, well, for the sites that we sold under the lease terms, we do have this term providing that they will have to complete the construction of flats by a certain date, and if the developer doesn't put up flats for sale, then there is a risk, because in the terms of the lease we do set down a date by which all the flats will have to be completed. As regards the number of sites, because we only allow for 5 minutes for question and answer, and I'm already speaking in excess of the 5-minute rule, and therefore I cannot repeat what's been said. And sometimes I also do not understand whether it's some members who do not understand it, or if they have chosen to say that they do not understand. But then if they have any queries about the figures, I welcome their questions and will be more than happy to give them a reply. As to the issue on Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people, I'll defer to my colleague to respond. Well, concerning the Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people idea, Hong Kong permanent residents will be the targets. In other words, under the policy of Hong Kong P for Hong Kong P, there will be restriction on the sale and resale of these units. The main consideration is that for non-permanent residents of Hong Kong, they would also include different types of persons, some of whom might not have a long-term housing need in Hong Kong, and to further delineate who should be defined as Hong Kong people, there might be some practical difficulties. That's why the current thinking is that Hong Kong permanent residents will be the basis of this policy. All right, next, Mr. Lo Wai Kwok, and then Tin Pak, and then Michael Tin. I have two questions. Number one, on Wednesday this week, this council carried a motion moved by Mr. Kwok-hing, amended by Mr. James Tien, and one of the items in the motion is that for PRH production every year, it should reach 30,000, so that for those on the waiting list, the waiting time can be shortened to about 2 years. And just now, I've also heard that you're still talking about 15,000 a year, and therefore it's a far cry from what we are demanding. We're asking for 30,000. I understand that the Bureau and the administration are working very hard to increase the production. And just now, I've also heard Mr. Paul Chan say that in terms of land development, there are some difficulties, and there are also some constraints in terms of the time for completion. But then I'm sure many members of the public would be very anxious to know, that is, in the next 5 years, what is the production? So can we be given more figures? Another issue is about the Chai Wan factory estate. It will be converted into other uses. All right, this is going to be a showcase. So 180 PRH flats will be put up in order to meet the immediate need. And as some members have said, it's just a drop in the ocean. Well, the number of units that can be put up will be very small, and indeed it's not the best way to make use of the industrial building. I'm not saying no to this, but then I'd just like to know whether or not this is going to be a transitional measure or what, because I've also heard some voices in the community. They are actually saying that for industrial buildings like these, if they have to be converted, I think the most appropriate use would be for business starters or innovation center for the youth. That would be a very good adaptive reuse of such industrial buildings. And some even suggested that, in fact, for this site, if it can be redeveloped, then the number of residential units will be a lot higher. So if you can rebuild the entire building, then more PRH flats can be put up. Professor Chung? Yes, I'll first respond to the comments made by Mr. Low with regard to the Chai Wan factory estate and the proposed conversion. Yes, indeed, there are two or three different views in the community. Some said that we should have torn it down so that we can just put up regular PRH blocks. Some are against the demolition of this building because it has a historical value, because this is one of the earliest or oldest industrial buildings in Hong Kong. And as far as the Bureau is concerned, when we try to look into it, well, between conservation and putting up more flats, and of course if we maintain the original building structure, then because of the architectural constraint, the number of units that can be put up would be very limited. That's an inevitable issue.
We have close communication or close liaison with the district council to work out a balanced, a solution that can meet all different requirements. For supply, I would defer to Mr. Prescott. Before you answer, can you reply to me in relation to PRH, that is the 180, is a transitional measure. In the future, the factory estate will be turned into a different use. Is that the case? Perhaps I will also ask Mr. Prescott to cover that as well.
Mr. Chairman, a couple of things. First, to answer on the 180, once you've allocated something as a public rental housing unit, it is a public rental housing unit. So I don't see this as an interim arrangement at all. And certainly, I wouldn't want our tenants to assume that they'll be moved in and moved out at short notice. That would not happen. So once we allocate it as a public rental housing unit, it then becomes part of our traditional stock. Beyond that, I can't say what might happen in future. If the site isn't very popular, then we'd have to reconsider. But certainly, I want our tenants to understand that once they're allocated a unit, it is a public rental housing unit until we change the use. Now, there have been a few questions earlier, and indeed right now, about the production of public rental housing over the next 5 years. I can give you the figures because all of these sites are already committed. We have contracts let, we have work on site at various different stages. So, for example, this year we're going to be producing about 13,000, just over 13,000. Next year it'll be 14,000. The year after about 13,000 again, and then 2015-16 it goes up to 20,000, in fact nearly 20,500. And then in 2016-17 it's about 15, just over 15,000. So over the next 5 years we have already secured and are developing more just over 75,000 as we've told the public, and those figures are now firm. Beyond the next 5 years, of course, we're still working with Development Bureau, Lands Department on sites. Some of the sites we've secured, but we're at a sort of preliminary planning stages. So those are the figures that I can provide at this stage, Mr. Chairman.
I think this indeed cannot respond to what I have mentioned. Next is Michael Tian, to be followed by Mr. Ronnie Tong. I want to ask, well, what is the administration's policy for private housing? Well, I fail to hear it clearly. It seems that they are in chunks, fragmented. So do they have a general idea? Well, there are three groups in the private housing market. Those are first-time owners, those who want to change to buy a bigger flat, and those that are investors. For the BSD, they won't cover local companies because they say that, well, now home ownership is more important than investment. Well, obviously, that is the mentality of the administration. So I don't understand for Hong Kong, property for Hong Kong people, how can you ensure that these flats are for occupation themselves, for home ownership? You said you can only help people to get on the property ladder by giving them then opportunity to own a flat. When the CE rolled out the 10 measures, he said that they will assist home ownership for the lower stratum of society. Of course, that you're talking about first-time owners. And you said that for the Hong Kong land, for Hong Kong people, there is already a restriction. You don't want to impose further restrictions on it. Who will benefit? Speculators. They will get into the market, they will snatch up property and only to rent it out, and they will make profit. And you also want to squeeze out investors. You think that if you squeeze out mainlanders that there won't be any speculators? Well, unless you cancel the exchange rate link. Otherwise, we're facing with a continuous low interest environment. All my friends are suffering losses in the shares and securities market. They just close their eyes and swarm to the property market because there is no other good investment. So if you don't have land supply specifically for them to help them get onto the property ladder, there is no use. You talk about Hong Kong land for Hong Kong people. You are not resolving problems for Hong Kong people at all. And that's a question that I've previously asked about the Hong Kong land for Hong Kong people with the 30 years restriction. What is the legal basis? Is it the case that the next term, the next government can simply lift it or cancel it? When will you be able to announce that in relation to the 30-year restriction, it cannot be changed, or you can, through administrative measure, change it? So I want to know how binding it is legally. When can you give us an answer? Another quick question. A lot of people are talking about revitalizing industrial buildings, turning them into residential building. You know, when it comes to design, toilets, kitchens, the requirement is very different. So have you worked out the solution to convert industrial buildings into residential ones without incurring a high cost? If that is the case, that can continue, or that itself is a problem. Who's to take this? Mr. Zhang. For Hong Kong land, for Hong Kong people, I will defer to Mr. Chan. I will defer to the PS. About Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people or Hong Kong land for Hong Kong people. The objective of the policy is not to subsidize or assist home ownership. It's the case that for land use, priority will be given to Hong Kong permanent residents. So the idea is to impose restrictions on sites that are suitable to be used for Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people. The units built will be subject to restrictions, but you have not answered me. What is the objective? What is the target? So it's for Hong Kong people, for Hong Kong speculators, investors? So what is the biggest problem here? Could you maybe let them answer first? Can you reply to me? I have mentioned the objective is to give priority to housing needs of Hong Kong people. We have not differentiated whether the purpose of acquiring the unit. Why not? May I continue? The policy itself is not as one of subsidized housing. So when it comes to the buyer's status or further restrictions, they will not be considered. Because they will impose further difficulties. The idea of the policy is to implement this measure through land condition. If the land is suitable for Hong Kong, property for Hong Kong people, we will impose the Hong Kong land for Hong Kong people condition in the land lease. It's our plan to implement it on a pilot basis on 2 sites in Kai Tak development area. For the future, we will, at the suitable time, consider whether to impose the Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people condition on other sites. And we don't set down any fixed targets. Mr. Chan. Conversion of industrial buildings into residential use. We are aware of quite a large number of applications, but when it comes to land premium, we have yet to reach an agreement with them. And what about structure? Have you overcome all these technical issues? Sorry, Chairman, may I supplement that for wholesale conversion, premium has to be paid, the building will have to be torn down, and if they are converted into transitional accommodation, we are at the moment looking at the adoption of administrative measures, say fire safety, ventilation, lighting, hygiene, to make it possible. And very often, the construction of the industrial building is to maximize the site coverage. But if requirements of fire services and lighting have to be met, then the site coverage will be smaller. We are studying the comments received and working out a solution. Mr. Ronnie Tong to be followed by Mr. Leung Yiu Chung. I'm not a member of either panel. I'm here to listen to hear from the administration to see if they have any new ideas when it comes to increasing land supply. I've been very patient, but I failed to hear anything. I have wasted 2 hours of my life. When it comes to land policy, say the past few years, they keep changing their policies. In the Donald Tsang era, in his last policy address, he said that they're actively exploring the development of rock cavern and also reclamation, because we have a shortage in land supply. With C.Y. Leung, he said that we have only developed less than 20% of Hong Kong, meaning that there is still a large area that is undeveloped. But now, they are looking at anti-northeast, about 80 hectares of land. They said that without which, Hong Kong will sink. You will not have a roof over your head. But then, the secretary said that, well, we actually have 800 hectares, but then it's changed to 391 hectares. But then they say that, well, it actually covers the areas under flyovers and also the CS4A's residents. So I have no idea what the administration's housing policy and long-term plannings are. Do you know? Chairman, do the officials themselves know? I don't think they do. When it comes to last government's proposals, reclamation, rock cavern, I think they have adopted the Tung Chee Hwa's approach. If it's not mentioned, they don't exist. It doesn't exist. So can you tell us clearly? Are you talking about actual land that can be used to produce PRH units, excluding the 80 hectares of NT Northeast because they are not readily available. Actually, tell me how many hectares there are. Who is to take this? Mr. Chang? I would defer to Mr. Chan. Policies set down by the last government, as pointed out by Mr. Tong, reclamation and rock cavern, they are in progress. The Sha Tin sewage treatment works will be reprovisioned in a rock cavern. The site released will be for other uses. Reclamation. For the stage 1 public engagement exercise is just finished. We are now working on the report. We have received about 50,000 comments, if my memory serves me right. We have identified over 20 sites outside Victoria Harbour. We are collating the comments. And then we will narrow the sites, reduce the number of sites, and then we will start the next stage consultation. The work is being carried out. NT Northeast. It was started in the last government, and we will continue with it.
As to land supply policy, we hope that our policy objective is to provide or offer land to the market continuously so that there can be steady development in the market. And in recent months, we can see that there is exuberance in the market. In August, the CE announced the 10 short to medium-term measures, and then in October, we announced the Hong Kong Property for Hong Kong People policy. And as we know, the supply is very tight, and for forming land so that it can be used or we can put up flats for sale. It will take time, and therefore we have introduced different measures, including the special stamp duty and also the buyer's stamp duty. I don't need the secretary to repeat what has been said. I can still remember those, and therefore I don't need you to repeat those. But then my question is rather simple with regard to rock cavern and also reclamation and so on. Those would be for the longer term. But then what about the immediate issues within the next 5 years? For example, what you can see as available for public rental housing development, how many sites are there? Well, for PRH development sites, we have to work with the THB. So how many hectares will be available? We have to look at their production target, 15,000 units a year, and also for HOS scheme. So you're not going to increase that, right? So during this term of government, so only 15,000 units a year, and that's set in stone. Nothing can be changed about it. Is that right? Well, earlier on, when I answer another question, Mr. Prescott has already said that in the coming 5 years, he has already given you the actual figures as to, and also the land situation. And just now, as Mr. Prescott just said, and for the future developments, we're still liaising with the Development Bureau. All right, next, Mr. Lang Yu-chong, and then Tony Chair. Lang Yu-chong, Chairman, we are discussing the short to medium measures announced by the Chief Executive, and then for the longer term, we will have to leave it to the LTHS steering committee. But then the thing is, if you look back, this term of government has not dealt with the former government's initiatives. There has been no review, and Mr. C.Y. Leung's government has not responded to that, because as far as grassroots housing is concerned, the biggest problem is during the last term of government, its policy, its approach were problematic, and in C.Y. Leung's election manifesto, the implications will also be very far-reaching, because the administration has been emphasizing that with 15,000 units being put up every year, that would be enough. And then C.Y. Leung also said this in his policy manifesto. But then what he has changed is that for the next 5 years, the PRH production will be compressed into 4 years. So in terms of the actual number, there will not be any change. It's only that they are trying to compress the time frame or the timeline so that they can be produced earlier and sooner. That's why the earlier question is, how are you able to increase land supply? And the bureau director said that they would just be working with the THB, but then the THB would be basing its work on the past pledge of the former government and also what C.Y. Leung said in his manifesto. But then when the last term of government was talking about the 15,000 units, actually, we were actually having about 150,000 families in the waiting list, and now it's increased to 200,000. All right, just by simple arithmetic. All right, in the past you said that with 15,000 units a year, then the average waiting time is about 3 years. So that's the first time when you said that the first offer will be made within 3 years. All right, even if it's just the first offer, in the future, how long do we have to wait? Well, in the past we only had 150,000 on the waiting list. Now 200,000. So how did you come up with the sum? Well, even though I teach mathematics, I don't know how you managed to come up with this calculation. I don't understand it. So 150,000, 3-year waiting time, and now 200,000. How come the waiting time is the same, 3 years? And still, the production rate is the same, 15,000 a year. I don't know how you managed to come up with this figure. Is it that for the 200,000 on the list, if you wait for too long, then you will just quit, you will just leave the queue? Well, a couple of days ago, the bureau director said that, well, there would be more than 15,000 units a year because you'll be evicting more tenants, and then there about 8,000 can be made available, and therefore in total there are about 23,000 units a year. So are you saying that you'll be stepping up enforcement measures so that more people can be evicted and then units can be made available for reallocation? Is that what you're going to do? If that's indeed the case, then it's really very sad. Because for sitting tenants, it's very hard for them to get a unit. And now if you enforce the law very strictly, evicting people, then where are they going to live? So this is going to give rise to further problems. So I think the crux of the matter is, for the annual production rate of 15,000, can that be adjusted? If you are not going to change that, nothing can be done. All right. On Wednesday, you said that it's not that we don't want to increase that. It's not set in stone. So long as more land can be available, then when necessary, we are prepared to change it. But then, as Mr. Paul Chen just said, he would be working with you. So I don't know what's the relationship. I think you're just passing the buck on to each other. So I think you should consider setting aside more land, including those on the application list. Well, in the land sales list, can you take out some of those sites for PRH development? And in some sites, as far as I know, in Hong Shui Kiu, you have already resumed some sites, and you originally intended to build low-density houses. Can that be changed into PRH sites so that you'll be able to speed up the process and that more resources can be made available? So that instead of building 15,000 units a year, you can build more units, and that would also help the grassroots who are living in subdivided flats and cubicle flats. That would ease a lot of pressure instead of having them complaining all the time that they don't have decent housing. Well, I'll first answer the question about the 15,000 target a year, and also for the application list and also Hong Shui Kiu, I'll defer to Mr. Paul Chen. Well, I believe that for those on the waiting list, yes, the queue is getting longer. And with regard to the 15,000 production as set down by the former government, obviously we will have to follow up on that, and that will also be comprehensively reviewed in the LTHS review, because for different groups in the community, they have different housing needs, including the grassroots and also those who are living in substandard living condition. And of course, with this assessment, then in terms of supply, we will have to do something about it. Just now, Mr. Leung also talked about the recovered flat. Well, that's what I said in the debate. I am not saying that we are going to evict people deliberately, because we do have some established tenancy policy, and there are also cases in which the tenants have not been evicted, they might have bought up HOS flats, or they might have voluntarily moved out. But then on the whole, with regard to the demand for PRH flats, during the motion debate, I've already admitted that this is a serious problem. Mr. Chen? Thank you, Chairman. On the application list and the sites on the list is not that they cannot be converted to PRH use. I do know that there have been precedent cases, and I've also received a written question, and I'll be answering that next week, and we'll be providing further information in a written reply, and we'll be giving you more details. But then in considering this, we also have to think about the demand for private housing. So what about land for private housing development? I'd just like to follow up. All right, between the two bureaus, you said that you'll be working closely together, and that's what Mr. Paul Chen just said. But then Professor Cheung said that for the 15,000 units that will have to be discussed in the context of the LTHS review. But then what is very pressing is the grassroots housing problem. Can you do something right away? So can you review the 3-year waiting period and also the 15,000 target a year? So can Mr. Chen work closely with you by offering you more sites, and then that would help solve the problem more quickly? Well, on Wednesday, during the motion debate, I've already made it clear that for the average waiting time of about 3 years, well, I believe that it's not appropriate for us to just change it arbitrarily, because currently the supply is very tight, and in the future, with regard to the demand, is a very challenging issue, and how we can tackle it. Indeed, the two bureaus will have to work together in order to resolve this problem. All right, next, Lee Cheuk-yen, and then Abraham Sheck. Tony Chair first. Tony Chair first. Thank you, Chairman. Under the existing policy, for the newly completed flats, there are 3 main channels to offer them. 1, sale of land. Number 2, rezoning, including reclamation or converting farmland into residential uses, or industrial buildings being converted into residential buildings, and also changing the plot ratio. That's the 3rd way. All right, as far as land sales, as the Bureau Director just said, they would be announcing that on a quarterly basis. That is, the land sales program will be made available on a quarterly basis. Well, I support it, because by doing so, we will have more flexibility, and then the administration will then be able to look at the developments in the market, and some adjustments can be made. I hope that in making the regular announcement, you will also have to emphasize that in terms of your own land reserve, you have a certain amount of land available. I think that's important to the public, because if we know that where there is a demand from the market, then at present, within a very short space of time, the administration will be able to offer such sites for sale in order to respond to market demands. You can increase supply if there is a need. But then in the application list, well, those sites would be available within the next couple of years, and where necessary, you can actually put them up as soon as possible. And then for new town development, it would take a long time, and a lot of problems will also have to be overcome. But then in the past, I've also noticed that, well, in the OCP, there are many sites that can be developed, but then they have been zoned to CDA, or Comprehensive Development Area. So the administration should review those sites, because sometimes when I look at those CDAs, some of them have not been developed for years. And in the past, I've also encountered some cases whereby there was a CDA and the size was very large, and different owners would be affected. And those owners will have to sort things out amongst themselves, and very often that would also delay the process. So can you be more flexible, so that you don't necessarily have to wait till all the owners have agreed? In fact, if they can develop separately, so long as they can follow the requirement on the OCP, that would also speed up the supply. And that's point number one. And second, in the new territories, there are many residential users. Many sites have been zoned residential, but then in terms of the development density, it can be very low. In some cases, it's only 0.2 or even 0.4 or even 0.75. So in those cases, well, given the fact that you're actually having this pressing need, and there are so many problems that have to be resolved, so can you consider increasing the density appropriately? Thank you.
陳國，
係，多謝主席。主席好多謝啊。
Mr. Paul Chen, thank you, Mr. Tony Chair, for your suggestion. Just now you talk about the quarterly application list. Can we disseminate clearer messages to the market as to land supply? I'll go back to see what I can do. With regard to CDA sites on OCP, whether they should be reviewed, I'll go back to talk to the planning department on development density or plot ratio. We've been doing that because for disposed sites, increasing plot ratio would be one of the ways to increase supply in the short term. And Mr. Gary Fan also said that in Chiang Kwano South there are 4 sites, and we're actually doing some minor relaxation. So we are making some modification to that, and for other sites we are also looking into those as well. But then there are some difficulties. Whatever can be done will be done. For example, you have to look at the accessibility and also infrastructure facilities. For example, water supply, drainage, and so on. Those will also have to be considered. In particular, for accessibility, the constraints would be more serious. Thank you. What about CDAs?
我哋會返去。
We will look at CDAs. Mr. Lee Chuk-yen, to be followed by Abraham Chang. Thank you. A number of members have covered this. We're not happy with the PRH production at all. We see a lot of subdivided flats, and they said that they will work on rent subsidy. Of course, we're happy to see that. But the root of the problem is to speed up allocation, a rent allowance. But we need to speed up PRH allocation, and they will have to wait for the review of the long-term housing strategy before we know whether the 15,000 will be changed. And that means we have to wait till 2014. Another 2 years wasted. C.Y. Leung keeps saying that we should lose no time. Professor Zhang, are you wasting time? We are facing with an urgent problem, but you're taking things slow. I don't want you to repeat information about Development Bureau. You're talking about 15,000 units produced this year, next year, the year after. I think sites have been identified before this because there is a lead time. I don't know whether it's 3 years. So can you tell me what is the lead time from land identification? All right, I'll take it as 3 years. Assuming it's 3 years, if today we are still thinking about 15,000 3 years down the line, and then for 2014 you decide, well, instead of 15,000, let's go to 20,000, 30,000. What about the lead time if you don't find sites today? 3 or 4 years down the line, you will not be able to increase land supply. Do you admit that? If you don't find sites, then there won't be any sites in 3 years. And if you want to change the level of production, then you start looking for sites, then it will be a further another 5 years. We're talking about an urgent problem. There is urgency in it. I think it is impossible for you to expedite it. So how do you tackle this lead time problem? Another question. In paragraph 15, you're talking about 36 GIC sites, and you reckon you'll be able to provide 11,900 private and public housing flats. How many private housing, how many public housing? Can you give me more information in a table form, the 36 sites? I would like this panel to get information about the 36 sites so that we will know about the future development. You talk about private and public housing flats amounting to 11,900. I want a breakdown of the figures. Paragraph 16, industrial building. The administration talks about revitalization, then rent will be put up because it's a chance for people to make money. And now you say that they're going to be turned into residential use. It's another opportunity for them to make a profit. But I think it's weird the way it's phrased. You talk about transitional accommodation. What about long term? If it is only for transitional accommodation, why do you want it this way anyway? These industrial buildings are privately owned. I think for those owned by the HA or the government is a different approach. But in relation to paragraph 16, you're talking about privately owned industrial building. You allow revitalization and at the same time you say they are transitional accommodation. What about long term? Please give me an explanation. Professor Zhang. GIC and industrial building, I will defer to Mr. Paul Chan. PRH production lags behind demand. I have stated my opinion in Wednesday past. We will base our plan on current demand and the amount of people living in a substandard condition, 15,000 a year. I have openly said that it seems to be inadequate. But as to how many do we need a comprehensive planning and assessment. Targets set in the past, it takes time for them to be realized and to be turned into actual flats. For time, I will defer to Mr. Pescott.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I said earlier that we're trying to speed up the delivery of units. The key issue for us is actually getting land that's ready for development. Because I can get land that has to be resumed or cleared or rezoned, it takes a lot of time. But if I get land that's ready for development, then the fastest I can probably do it, including both planning, substructure and superstructure, is about 4.5 years.
主席，咁就其實呢個問題。
Exactly, 4.5 years. So if you identify, well, if everything is in place in 2014 when it comes to long-term housing strategy, they work out the indicator, say for example 20,000 or 30,000. Of course, we want 35,000. Anyway, there is a figure. You will have to wait for 4.5 years, and we're wasting 2 years now. So my question to the Secretary is, if you're wasting these two years, then in the end, when the indicator is adjusted, then it will have to wait for another 4.5 years before that can be achieved. So can you tackle this lead time problem? We're not wasting any time. Of course, if we have yet to see whether there will be a new indicator upon the completion of the LTHS review, we will, with the coordination of other bureau and department, find new sites. Mr. Paul Chan, the 36 GIC land, 10 of them have details announced. For the other 26, we have to go through the planning procedure, and we have to consult district councils. So when one is ready, we will make the announcement. About the proportion is about 7,000 public housing units and 4,000 private. Industrial building turned into transitional residential accommodation. Well, it involves wholesale conversion. Just now, a member asked whether 2 or 3 floors of building is changed, whereas the others are not. We think it is not possible because there may be safety implications. Say, for example, there are 10 stories in an industrial building, and if 2 or 3 floors have been changed into residential use, whereas the others are still used by factories, what if there is a fire? So we're only talking about wholesale conversion. What we see from past experience is when it comes to premium payment cases, so far we're talking about a small number of successful cases because they get bogged down on the amount of premium. And we're talking about wholesale conversion into transitional accommodation. Still, we're talking about 10 years. And in this case, they may not have to pay premium. And on the other hand, they will have to put in hefty investment. If you want to change it into residential use, it involves a lot of changes. So we're studying it to see what measures we can have to expedite the whole process. Just a short point. Well, how do you assess the impact on industrial rental? As you know that whenever the administration makes an announcement, there will be an impact. Have you done any assessment? It was announced in the last year's policy address. And it's not just the case of industrial buildings. We have a tight supply of residential flats as well. And in this case, we're talking about wholesale conversion. So the impact on the relevant market is rather indirect. Mr. Ibrahim Sheikh. The way we deal with it is a novel problem. It just cropped up in July. But in fact, this has been in place for a long time. Back then we have Mr. Michael Soon, his 9 measures. The announcement of the Soon 9 measures is to save the market. And now with the Leung's 10 measures, it is to dampen the market. Why? Because of the impotence or the incompetence of the administration. In the past 7 years or 10 years, Reader every year told the administration supply in the coming 5 years. The housing departments, the development bureau completely ignore them. And they were asked to put more sites on sale, but this request has been ignored. In 2009, there were only 7,000 first-hand residential units available for sale, and this has in turn driven up prices in the second-hand market. And coupled with that is the high land price policy. The objective is to prop up the entire market. The public are affected, and now people are unhappy. They blame that the property prices is high. It's just like when prices for bread is high. Why? Because flour is expensive. We're talking about Chiang Kwan know about 5,000, 4,000 $1,000 per square foot in the land sale, and in the end, the unit will be sold for over $10,000 per square foot. They made the request. The developers made the request, gave you information, but they've been ignored, and now there is high property prices, and they are blamed. Is this government a caring government? Mr. Jie said, that whatever the measures are, they boil down to 3 things: land supply and change of land use, sale program, lease modification. Government departments don't don't tie in their efforts with these measures, say, for example, high premium is to be paid, and then in turn it drives up the price of the end product. Land supply shortage in the short and medium term, they only look at government land. Chairman, you are an expert. Why do we have successful cases in new towns? Because of the change in land lease. That's why we have available land to build new towns. But they don't look at them. They just want to expedite a housing supply. And I can tell you that a change of land lease is the quickest. But they are afraid that there will be the allegation of government colluding with the business sector. Privately owned land can be made available for PRH production. It's a matter of cooperation. But some members say that no, that can't be done. You're just cutting off your nose to spite your face. Do you really want to resolve housing problem, or you just want to sell government land first? Who is propping up the property prices? And the only party that suffers is the public. We have actually many different ways that can resolve the problem. And you have to study every one of them. Keep an open mind. There is a lot of privately owned land. And so you need to have a private-public partnership. And this is the quickest and easiest way to solve the problem. Northeast. You talk about a conventional approach and you want to acquire land. You say this is the quickest way, but actually it's just the slowest. The solution is in the hand of the administration. It's only a matter of whether you want to do it. You fail to look at the whole picture.
So the 10 measures are not enough, and therefore you will have to look at how you can tie in with private property rights, and you'll be able to achieve a win-win situation if you're able to do it. All right, do you need a reply? No? No, I've already spent my 5 minutes. We still have 30 minutes to go. We have time. Would you like him to respond? Well, if he's to respond, then I'd like to put this to Mr. Prescott. How come in 2005, when Rita wrote to them on many occasions saying that, 2009, 2010, 2011, well, in terms of new flat supply, there will be a short supply. Well, I have a copy with me, so please do not tell us that he has not received that. Well, knowing that there will be this short supply, how come he has not resolved to resolve this problem? So, Mr. Prescott, please answer the question.
It's a land supply issue. I'll have to defer to the Development Bureau.
This is land supply, housing.
This is housing. This is about housing. It's not about land supply.
Chairman, probably the best thing I can say is that since I wasn't in Housing Department at the time, it's very difficult for me to give an answer.
Chairman, I think there is continuity in the government. It's not that because this is CY Leung's government, that's why you are forgetting everything from the former government. And you should not just attribute it to the former government. Well, for the existing government, it doesn't have the flour. No, it's not that they do not have flour. It's about what kind of flour they are going to use. And if they just put up expensive flour and then they're resuming private flour, it's not fair. And also, is it really good to the public? Because if you're really genuine in resolving the problem for the 200,000 people on the waiting list, if they want to have a PRH, then I think most of the sites are now in private hands, and they'll be more than happy to work with you in public-private partnership. All right, Professor Chan will have to take back the flour. All right, Bureau Director. All right, recovering the flour is not going to work. You can't just resume people's farmland. But then you will have to have a win-win situation whereby there can be public-private partnership. So you can resume the land, you can also get the land, and then you can also put up more PRH flats. You can use private land for public uses. Bureau Director, well, Chairman, I'll say a few words. Yes, for every term of government, well, how it deals with the prevailing problem, of course, it has its own considerations. But then Mr. Sheck, being a veteran lawmaker and also being someone from the real estate sector, of course, I respect his views and his analysis of what happened in the past decade or so. I agree with what he said. Towards the end of his remarks, he said that in a community we will have to strive for a win-win situation whereby developers, they have some resources, so they can also make the best use of those resources in order to achieve a situation whereby there can be blossoming of different ideas and developments. Well, that is the overall direction, and we'll strive to do it. Chairman, for property prices, well, it might look simple. Well, for Urban Renewal Authority, well, they've resumed some land buildings are $4,000, $5,000 a square feet, but then by the time when they put them up for sale, it's over $10,000. So why can't they just build the buildings themselves instead of operating in the market? Because property prices have become so high, and if the URA can do it itself, then the prices can be set at a more reasonable level, and then they can also be sold to those waiting for HOS flats, because the way they are doing it, well, in the past is understood because, well, we would like to commercialize the projects, but then they are so well off these days, they are actually not able to put on their socks. So they should have helped the administration in resolving the problems for the middle class. Is the same for the housing society, and I think the URA should adopt the same approach. Sorry, let me finish. And because I still have time, Chairman, you will also have to coordinate. They will also have to put up land for PRH development, because as for some elderly applicants, all right, you talk about 3 years. You're actually joking, Chairman. Well, how many people really managed to get a flat after 3 years? Well, in some cases, they've been waiting since they were young, and they wait till after they pass away. Still, they have not been assigned or allocated a flat. You have 200,000 people on the waiting list, and you also allow white farm applicants to buy second-hand or secondary HOS flats. This is not going to work, because if you're white farm applicants, well, if you just allow the green farm applicants, then those flats can be surrendered, and then those can be made available for those on the waiting list. But then if you allow white farm applicants to do it, then the those on the waiting list will never be able to get a flat. Well, on Wednesday, as we have said, I think the way you're resolving the problem, you should look at the root of the problem. You should be helping those living in substandard housing. You will have to assign a flat to them before you help people to buy their own homes. I think your priorities are not right. I think for white farm applicants, all the flats should be made available for those waiting in the waiting list, and therefore those flats should only be available for green farm applicants. Yes, I understand that, because we have been. We say that you can't make straws if you do not have the materials, right? Joseph Lee, and then KK Fong. Well, I've read the government's paper. I'm not sure it's about land supply or housing supply, because in the paper it says that they're going to convert factory buildings into residential uses. This is nothing new, because we have been talking about adaptive reuse of those buildings. But then you will have to give us some figures. For example, in Taiwan, all right, you only be able to have 180 units in 2015, and then the URA might then be able to come up with another 100 or so units. So you're actually just talking about 300 plus flats in the next few years. So how are we able to address or tackle the problem? Well, we have many industrial buildings in the territory, but then the administration said that they will have to conduct EIAs, noise, pollution. So there are a lot of concerns and problems have to be addressed. But then there are many commercial buildings or industrial buildings that are very close to residential developments, and some of them have been left vacant, and some of them have not been put to very good use. So in Hong Kong, whether or not you look at it from land supply angle or from housing angle. So how you able to make the best use of these industrial buildings so that in the next 3 or 5 years, or at least during your term of government, you will not be wasting those resources. You can convert them into HOS or PRH flats. I agree with Mr. Abraham Sheikh that we will have to work hand in hand, or else with such industrial buildings available, they're actually located in the urban area, and if they are not put to use, then it's a waste. So if you do not have any specific plan for them, then it will be disappointing because it's a waste of resources, and these are very important sites. Professor Zhang? All right, I'll say a few words on the adaptive reuse of industrial buildings, the policy, and also how it's being rolled out. And then for the rest, I'll defer to Mr. Chen. All right, for the Chai Wan factory estate is under the HA, and as we just explained, the current design is that 180 flats will be offered. The reason why the number is so small, because this is an industrial building, and if you look at the structure, because we want to conserve the building, and therefore we are not going to change the structure. There are many constraints, and under those constraints, all we can do is to put up 180 flats. If we do not conserve it, if we just tear it down, and assuming that TPP allows us to do that, then the number will be very different. But then to be more specific with regard to the Chai Wan site, well, in the past there were many voices in the community asking for the conservation of the entire building. That's why we're trying to do this. We hope that we will be able to get the best of both worlds. All right, for adaptive reuse, I'll defer to the Deputy Secretary. All right, as Mr. Lee just said, for the revitalization of industrial building, that policy has been announced a long time ago. Well, to set the background for you. All right, for industrial buildings, we have also noticed that there are areas which have not been put to very good use at present, and therefore in terms of planning, the planning department has been reviewing the situation concerning industrial sites, whether these sites can be rezoned, and of course other measures will have to be considered. For example, the surrounding environment, whether there are other infrastructural facilities, whether the sites are still in active use by the industries. And in 2009, we also reviewed the situation, and quite a number of those sites have been rezoned to other uses, including residential, commercial, or the latest commercial, residential, or business uses. Well, the policy on adaptive reuse of industrial sites is to provide facilitation to the existing industrial building owners so that they'll be able to make use of existing industrial buildings for redevelopment, or they can also convert it wholesale so that after the rezoning, they'll be able to put it to other uses. For example, well, in the application, there are a number of cases for adaptive reuse of industrial buildings. They are converting them into hotels or even commercial buildings. So in this respect, the entire policy of adaptive reuse of industrial building is to make the best use of industrial sites and also industrial buildings. Well, on this occasion, we talk about the interim housing here. And that's because we have seen that under the present buildings ordinance and also town planning ordinance, generally speaking, other than those that have been rezoned residential, for other industrial buildings, if they are located in commercial business district, then they cannot be converted into residential uses. But then, as we can see in the short to medium term measures, there is a need that we strengthen our measures and initiatives. We have been looking at industrial buildings and industrial sites, whether we can relax the requirements so that we can streamline the process, and then these industrial buildings can be put to interim use so that within a specified time they can be turned into transitional or interim housing. Well, I still have some time left. I'll be asking a brief question. All right, for industrial buildings and industrial sites, at present, well, some are owned by the government, some are owned by private individuals. Well, you say that you're going to streamline the process and relax the requirement, but then this is a housing problem that you're going to solve. We are not talking about commercial buildings, or there is a shortage of hotels and so on, and therefore you will have to announce as to what measures can be taken right away in order to make sure that for private land or government-owned industrial buildings or sites, they can be converted into residential use, and especially in the coming few years, and how many units can be put up, and then people will know. Well, there'll be a certain number of units coming on stream, and they'll know what to look for. Or else you might be trying to relax it, but then you have not been able to resolve the problem. You have not been able to do it in a timely manner so that there can be appropriate supply of land and units in order to resolve the problem. So I think the administration needs to face up to it. Thank you. All right. We have 25 minutes to go, and we have 5 people on the list. So we will have to control the time more strictly. All right, if the administration doesn't have anything to add, then KK Fong. Chairman, I have several comments. Yesterday we talked about how we can identify land for development, but then I think there is a question of people's need that has not been met, and the administration has not spoken on it yet. So for people on the waiting list, we have some 200,000 applicants, and even for the non-elderly applicants, you're actually talking about over 100,000. So in terms of the figures, it's a record high. And up till now, the administration is still reluctant to do something about it. During Donald Tsang's era, 3 years ago, you said that the annual production would be 15,000, and in the coming few years is going to stay at 15,000. You don't have to wait until after the LTHS review committee has come up with a result. You can work on it. So can the administration increase from 15,000 to 20,000, and then by the time when the LTHS steering committee finishes its work, you can increase it to 35,000. If you're able to do it right away, then actually they will not be coming on stream before the end of your term. So you can't wait for another year until the LTHS steering committee has finished its work, because you also have to take into account the amount of land that will be required. So can you make an early announcement that you're going to increase production? So at least you should build more than 15,000 as to the exact figure before the completion of the LTHS review. You have a lot of room to maneuver. Well, you actually can you can increase it by 10,000, for example. You will have to identify land for that purpose.
May I make several suggestions on increasing land supply? First, have you reviewed the villages? Say, for example, over 100 villages, and if there are buildings that are over 30 years old, buildings that are shorter, Lamshan estates, Lai Kok, I'm talking about estates, not villages. If we consider demolition and redevelopment, we're talking about quite a long time. Can we make that a reason and identify a state with older, shorter buildings for them to be redeveloped, say 10 years earlier? Well, Paktin, redevelopment of Paktin, we're talking about an additional 2,200 units. This is a very good example. So you need to review to see if there are similar estates. 2. Runway. The flight path. In Kowloon West, it used to be the main flight path, and there are lots of short buildings in Kowloon City, Sham Shui Po. They are lower than 7 floors. So can the URA or the URA plus HS or URA HS plus UA, they work together to speed up redevelopment of old districts. To increase the PR, that was quite low because of the flight path. 3. Sites on the application list are just sitting idly. So sites on the application list, if they are not triggered by developers, well, now they are complaining that there are not enough sites for available. They complain that there is no flour, but there is flour available. They don't use it. Then we use such sites that are not triggered by the developers, and use them for HOS or PRH. Say, for example, in 3 years, over the 3 years, they are not triggered. Then we will turn them into HOS or PRH sites, because otherwise the land will be left idling, vacant. I'll give a quick reply. Mr. Feng mentioned about the 15,000 production target is not sufficient. Can we just arbitrarily set down an indicator? Well, when I replied to Mr. Lee Cheuk-yen, I explained it very carefully, very clearly. We don't have a new indicators yet. And it's not the case that we stop looking for sites. We continue to look for sites. Increase number of flats through redevelopment. I will defer to Mr. Pescott about the current approach.
A couple of things. I agree with the honourable member. We are looking at older estates, but not just for redevelopment. We think we can also perhaps, because of the environmental implications, renovate them as well. And in renovation, we can sometimes upgrade and increase the numbers. That's an ongoing program. We announced Pact-in, I think, a few months ago. There will be other announcements coming forward when I complete those exercises.
What about the private sites? What about the private sites? Can I get some answers from the Secretary? That is also flight path and application list. In relation to URA, we will reflect the same to the URA. I know that they monitor. They have kept an eye on potential sites for the redevelopment. Sites on the application list are suitable for private housing. The Secretary, in a reply to a previous question, said that there has been precedent under which, where situation allows it, we have turned sites on the application list into sites for public housing. Thank you. Mr. Charles Mock. Members mentioned about revitalization of industrial buildings. Well, with the implementation of the policy, there are a number of side effects. A lot of industrial buildings are not just for industrial uses. The administration mentioned in the reply that a lot of them are of commercial uses or engage in small and medium-sized creative industries or information technology. In my sector, there are a lot of companies that have turned industrial buildings into data centers, and I see that the prices have gone up. So one of the byproducts of revitalization is to drive up cost for industrial, commercial, and industrial industry, creative industries. There is also mention of hotel uses and now residential use. I realize there is a need, but there is a need from different sectors. You will have to find the balance. The SMEs are using a lot of industrial premises because factories have vacated them. There needs to be a better planning. Of course, we need long-term housing supply, but you need to differentiate what these sites are being used for. While converting the industrial building, you will have to let the public know how you divide it for different uses. Just like I said, SMEs use the premises for commercial use or creative or cultural industries. They need the certainty. they don't want the premises to be turned into a different use. Say, for example, premises being turned into hostels, thereby driving up the prices. I think this will be good for society as a whole. I defer to Development Bureau. May I take this question? Revitalization of industrial buildings, as I've said. We will review the planning aspect to see if these sites are suitable for conversion. We will go through the statutory planning procedure to rezone the industrial sites into residential ones, and they will be reflected on the statutory plans. So we have taken the points raised by Mr. Mok into account. In relation to specific industrial buildings being converted into other uses, of course, that depends on the land use after rezoning. The conversion, whether wholesale or not, will be done by the owner. So the government doesn't have a great part to play. And among the applications for revitalization we have received, they are for different uses. There are hotel uses, office uses, and at the same time there are applications related to different uses. Say, for example, 10 are for new uses, cultural, creative industries, leisure and recreational uses. I believe that owners in the application of conversion will take into account different needs that is subject to demand and supply in the market. We have 23 members who've asked questions. In the second round, 3 members. We are scheduled to adjourn at 1:30, but I will extend it by 15 minutes. Dr. Kwok-hing, Kwok-hing, Fernando Zheng, Dr. Kwok. It's very rare when I agree with Mr. Sheck, although he's not here, but he's pointed one thing out. The administration deliberately push up land prices. I see that for sites available in the rolling program, 5.6, and new ones 27.9 hectares. Last year, 11 hectares for sale, and the year before, less than that, and the year before that, 10 hectares. So you see, the administration deliberately push up land prices, and that hasn't changed. And the secretary blame us for not knowing their data. Of course I do. Okay, if I believe you, and it's just only 200 hectares out of the 400 that is suitable. And if they are put on the application list, well, 30 hectares only. I think if you take half of it for sale, that will be more than that. I'm asking you to make available the site for HOS or PRH units. Mr. Pescott have mentioned that it will take 4 years. So if you don't do anything now, in 4 years' time, the HOS and PRH availability will not be increased. We're only talking about 15,000. I think applicants will have to wait for 10 years or more. Even if you stop new applications, you will have to wait for over 10 years before you are allocated a flat. So if you are now 50, then it will be 60. If you're 60, you'll be 70. If you're 70, maybe you have already died. I think the administration is really unscrupulous. It's not the case that they don't have land. So for those that are on the application list that are not triggered, I asked you to turn them into HOS or PRH units. You refused. What kind of government is it? I think they are just colluding together. Well, the THB secretary, I am not criticizing you for not doing anything. You said when it comes to land, is the one behind. So we asked Mr. Chan. He said, well, we will make available however much they want. They did not say that you need land for 20,000, 30,000. And you did not say that it will be increased from 15,000 to 20,000. But all I hear is inaction. You have a lot of land, including disposed sites, potential sites, those that are halfway between. So for disposed land, can you make them available as soon as possible? Don't just keep the high land prices. Make them available however the price. If they are not triggered, turn them into HOS or PRH units, or give them to the housing society for affordable housing. You don't have to blame the developers. Developers are holding over have been holding hundreds of hectares. That is their own problem. But you have land available. You can do something. So can the two secretaries answer me? Are you helping to maintain the high land price policy? Well, when it comes to land, is the Development Bureau, Mr. Paul Chan. For the 391.5 hectares of land are not all disposed sites. In reply to members' questions, I have mentioned this. I'm not asking all of the 390 hectares, half of it. If I remember it right, there are 90 sites that have been included on the application list. For the others, we're conducting studies. We're working on it. The land sales target will be done in accordance with our plan. This year, land sale along projects along railway lines, together with URA redevelopment projects, and land acquired from private ownership. We are talking about 20,000 private housing units.
Well, both of you have played a role in propping up property prices. Is that the case? Well, it's absolutely not the case for the Development Bureau. As far as the Development Bureau is concerned, we have never done that. Well, why are you not prepared to do it other than asking the four major developers to do it? Well, for the sites that are in the application list, any developer is free to apply for it. In fact, even within this year, there were sites that had been applied for by other developers. They managed to win the bids. So when we put up the land for sale, it's not true to say that we are actually in favor of a certain developer. What about converting certain sites for use and so on? Well, we did have precedents in the past, and we have also received a written question from a lawmaker. It's about the application list. That is for sites on the application list. Can that be changed to PRH uses? Well, I'll be giving you more details in my reply. Please wait. Mr. Kwok-hing. Thank you, Chairman. I'll be making use of my 5 minutes to ask the administration. I'm not asking you to do it immediately. I'd like you to give me 3 figures. That is to the joint panel, because I think these 3 figures are very important. I hope to do it in the form of a table. I've just drawn it up myself. I'm sure you would know it. So please tabulate it and put it in a table form. I'd like to get a table. I want the administration to tell us that during the first 5 years, that is from 2012 all the way up to 2017. So, and also in the next 5 years, that is 17, 18 to 21, 22. So we're talking about a 10-year period, all right? First 5 years and then second 5 years. So I'd like to know the housing supply figures, and these would include different channels available for offering different types of public-private housing, the size of the units, and the number of units. So by that I mean for private housing, as for public housing, that would also include MTRCL, URA, Housing Authority, and Housing Society. So please set out all these figures. Second is about different types of private housing and the different sizes of unit, including small to medium size and even luxurious apartments. And of course, that would also include interim rehousing units or quarters. So if I have not mentioned them, please set them out as well. So what I want is for the administration to give us a full picture, a complete picture of that. So try your best. And you should put down those figures in a table, and then we'll be able to see the full picture ourselves, and then we'll be able to have a better idea. There is no need for us to argue about that. That's number one. And number two, in terms of land supply, I would also like to ask the administration to set out, that is during the next 5 years, and also the following 5 years, again, is a 10-year period. So in terms of identifying or developing new sites, for example, there are two types. One is disposed sites, the other is greenfield sites. Well, for disposed sites, designated for public-private housing development, so what do you intend to do with them? How many hectares will there be? And how many sites are there? And also in terms of greenfield sites, in other words, you have not been able to farm the land, you have not been able to have all the substructure and infrastructure. So how many greenfield sites are there? And what is the target? And also, another type is, if you just look at what you have in the drawers, how many idling land or sites are there, and how many vacant buildings are there? So can you set out those figures as well? So that's the second table that I want. So please do give us the figures in a table. And thirdly, I hope that the administration can also set out those figures. That is, the administration intends to resort to new thinking and new approaches in identifying sites and what is the target. If you're able to give us the year as to when that will be available, for example, the development of rock caverns, reclamation, and so on. So you are developing new land. So what is your intention? What are your plans? I hope that the administration can respond to my request just now, and then we can have 3 detailed tables setting out all the figures. So being honest and sincere, I hope that you will provide those figures. And if you say that alright, you're not able to provide certain information, or if it's not appropriate for us to disclose those figures, please tell us the reason why, so that the public will be convinced that you are indeed not able to provide those figures. And if we are able to have those figures, then we'll be able to see the full picture, and we will then be able to share the burden with the administration, so that there will not be suggestions that are not feasible. I think it will be fair to both the administration and those who are involved in making suggestions to the public, to the government. Mr. Chen? Then issues, Chairman, I'll see what we can do. We'll try our best. Professor Zhang, what I'd like to point out is, just now, on the first point about public-private sector supply of housing, as Mr. Pescott said, in the coming 5 years, we have already given you all the concrete figures, but then for the next 5 years, there are a lot of variables. So we may not be able to come up with the specific data about the size of the flats and so on. Well, that's for public housing, but then for private housing, other than sites that the size of the units would be restricted, we don't know as to what the developers will be doing in the next 5 years, and also 5 years after that. So we'll see what we can do in providing the data. Yes, I understand that the Bureau might have some difficulties. It doesn't matter, so long as you can tell us the reasons. Then we will know why you are not able to do so. That's okay. Fernando Jiang. Thank you, Chairman. I think we have spent a whole morning on it, and I think it's good to have the two bureau directors here. They are very sincere in their attitude. They've been saying that they would be trying their best. But then what about our aspiration, our demand? We are representing the public. We can see the difficult situation that we are in. And after the 10 measures announced by C.Y. Leung, what is happening is that prices continue to go up, rents are also going up, and there are many people who are living in substandard housing. And the Secretary has also tried it out himself. You should now have first-hand experience of how it feels. You're actually talking about some 70,000 people, and some estimated that there might be up to 100,000 people living in substandard housing. So number one, you have to increase PRH supply. 15,000 is definitely not enough when compared to the 80s. We talk about some 30,000 plus, and actually it's a far cry from what we've been doing. And even in the early years of the reunification, we used to supply some 30,000 units a year, and now it's been 10 years later, and yet the supply has been reduced by half. So you will have to be more specific. You can't just say that you're concerned about this. And also for those substandard housing, you will have to set a target to phase them out. You have to have a timetable. You have to have a roadmap. You have to tell us. And also for rent, the way it is rising, you said that you're concerned about this, but then you're not going to introduce rent control because you said it's controversial, but then you will continue to be concerned about this. What does that mean? Because people are suffering. They are actually in dire strait. You can't just say that I'm concerned and I do have every sincerity to tackle the problem. It's not going to help. Can you be more specific? All right, for the 10 initiatives, and even with the white form applicants who do not have to pay premium and so on, well, it's neither here nor there. It's a far cry from the problem or from the difficulty that they're suffering, and rents are continuing to rise. Rents for the ordinary people is continuing to rise. We are not talking about commercial premises. We're talking about residential units. Everybody is suffering. So what are you going to do? What have you been doing? All right, you're just talking about some haphazard or piecemeal measure. About 2005, there will be 100 more units and so on in the PRH sector. Well, it's not able to solve the problem. And there are many columbarium sites. They are taking up government sites. So can you enforce the law? Can you just resume such government sites so that you can develop more housing? So can you respond to these areas? Can you be more specific? All right, be specific. Professor Zhang, all right, on housing supply in particular, PRH supply, I think like Dr. Fernando Zhang and other members, during the past few weeks, we've been saying that, or we have been talking many times, and I don't want to repeat myself. I don't want to just say that I'm concerned about this, but then in terms of specific solution to the problem, indeed, we will have to overcome some obstacles, whether short or medium term. We might be lagging a bit behind because of the lead time that will be required. But then from what I've heard, well, some 20 plus members have said, and the message is very clear. That is, at least within this council, we agree that both the executive and the legislature agree that we will have to work on it. Chairman is still not specific. But then can the Development Bureau Director tell us? All right, for some government sites that have been illegally occupied, why have they not resumed those sites? All right, I'll ask the Deputy Secretary to respond to that. Deputy Secretary? Well, Chairman, with regard to illegal columbariums, well, the Development Bureau and the FHB have been liaising on this. With regard to unlawful or illegal columbarium, or illegal occupation of government land, we will be taking enforcement action accordingly. Chairman, there is no way that you can force them to speak and give you the specifics on production, no specific figure. On rent control, no specific measure. On land supply, they will try their best. What does that mean? What is going to happen then? And also on law enforcement, many problems, and they said that they would be taking appropriate measures. So all these are empty remarks. Chairman, can you be more specific? Can you give us more? Can you tell us more concrete measures? I'm afraid I'll not be able to give what Dr. Fernando Cheung asked for. All right, if you want me to give you an answer as to rent control, well, the matter is very complex, but then it doesn't mean that, escalation of rent is not a social problem. It's not like that. But then we will have to see what we can do. All right, 23 members have asked questions and 3 have asked supplementary questions. Or 3 would like to ask supplementary questions, and it's time to wrap up. And I'd like to thank the 2 bureau directors, and I'd like to urge them. Actually, they've given appropriate response, and the fact is we will have to continue to work hard. And so much for the discussion. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned. Any other business? If there isn't, then I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.